This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where it is all over bar the shouting. The fat lady isn't so much gargling as doing her warm-up exercises. Donald Trump has declared victory and nobody, I suppose this is a silver lining of sorts, nobody is likely to accuse him of lying, the election of being rigged, or indeed to launch an attempted insurrection upon the seat of American government. Quite a lot of questions coming in that I can't answer. I don't know what happens to all the court cases, Kenneth, but I suspect that they are, to all intents and purposes, over. I think on days like today, you let me just chat a bit and then we'll work out what the conversation is going to sound like, stuff that I want to try and puzzle out, stuff perhaps I want to get off my chest. I've written down 3 words and I bet you can't for the life of you work out why or what links them. I've written down Dixville, Marks and Mateless. Dixville, Marks and Mateless. And the combination of those 3 things explains why when I turned to the news this morning, first thing actually, earlier than I usually do, 7 o'clock in the morning, being my kickoff point. And indeed when I turned to the news this morning, I felt that familiar sinking feeling, but I didn't feel the seismic shock that seems to have accompanied some responses to Donald Trump's victory. I had a small bet on Kamala Harris, and the odds last night were the same as what they were when I placed it a long time ago. And all of the odds, if you follow betting markets, were pointing towards a Trump victory. So I was a little surprised at some of the certainty, particularly from people who are normally quite good at this sort of thing. Some of the certainty, not only that Kamala Harris would win, but also that she would win by a country mile. So Dixville, Marks and Mateless. Let's start with Mateless, who did sterling work last night across all manner of platforms. But I don't know if you remember, was it a year ago when Emily went to America to sort of test the waters when everybody presumed that 2024 would be Biden versus Trump? Emily went to America and sought to establish, the lie of the land, electorally speaking. And I was taken aback, actually. I don't think I conveyed it on air. But I was really surprised by the first thing she said to me, which is that the main topic of conversation, or the thing that people seem to care most about, was the price of petrol, or gasoline, as they call it, at the pumps. Now, that was interesting for a number of reasons, but chiefly because for people like me, and possibly you, who presume that little things like trying to launch an insurrection against a democratically elected government, being found by a court essentially to be a rapist, or being a multiple felon. All of these things that I thought, and you possibly thought, or would have thought, would overshadow everything else. I'm fond of the phrase, as you know, personal depravity. The idea that Donald Trump's personal depravity would push all other concerns out of the electoral space, out of the political space. I don't care what he says you would think about the economy or about immigration or about any of the other issues that purport to be priorities in politics, because his personal depravity is so acute and so obvious that it won't matter. So that's mistake number 1. It is about the price of petrol at the pumps. People are looking at their personal financial situation and believing the man who said he will make it better. What you have in your pocket and the spending power you have in the store is not about GDP. It's partly about inflation. And that's where the first, if you like, a tragedy kicks in that the performance on inflation has been better than most in the world, but not good enough to diffuse the sense across much of America that they are worse off under Joe Biden than they were under Trump. So this notion that Liberals, I don't think, can let go of. I don't think you can say personal depravity doesn't matter. I don't think you can say we need to prepare ourselves for a new political age in which personal depravity doesn't matter. Daniel Finkelstein in the Times today writes quite brilliantly, and he wrote before the results landed, so it gave him a sort of freedom, if you like, to speak without the bias of knowledge. Indeed, he acknowledged this himself. He said, I have an advantage over you. You are reading this knowing at least something of the presidential election result. I am writing before the votes have been counted. It's one of the most acute pieces of political analysis that I think I've ever read. And it runs through all of the things that we have run through on this programme. It points out that he has remained politically viable through a series of quite extraordinary scandals, multiple felonies, found by a court to have raped a woman, disowned by his former vice president and his former national security advisor, called a fascist by his former chief of staff, and described by his former military chief as the most dangerous person ever. So when you get your little pound shop Trumpites in the Conservative Party like Suella Braverman claiming that the nomenclature of fascism, that the accusations of being like Hitler have come from the left, they're lying to you again, just like they did when they told you Liz Truss would be a brilliant prime minister, or when they told you Boris Johnson was an honest man, or when they told you that Brexit would be brilliant. They're lying to you again. The queue of people describing Donald Trump in fascistic and hideous terms consisted largely, for the final months of the campaign, of people who had once been in his inner circle. Not just people who'd once voted for him and regretted it, but people who had once been in his inner circle. His own vice president, his own national security advisor, his own former chief of staff, and his former military chief described him, and I quote, as the most dangerous person ever. And as Daniel Finkelstein writes, barely touches the sides of all the scandals he's been embroiled in and all of the staff members who have sounded the alarm about him. And Liberals have to cling to the notion that this matters. You can't let go of the idea that this stuff doesn't matter just because it seems not to matter to a majority of the American electorate. I think he's probably going to win the popular vote for the first time, looking at how things stand. So that is why I was haunted almost, and conscious perhaps of not having paid as much heed to it at the time as I should have done, of how precise it was of Emily Maitlis to point out, I think a year ago, from America, on a mission to find out how the land lay electorally, that people were really concerned about the price of petrol at the pumps. Isn't that incredible? The second thing I wrote down was Dixville. This is why I went to bed last night thinking Donald Trump was going to win. Dixville Notch in, I think, New Hampshire has one of those wonderful political traditions, one of those, it's almost a pub quiz question, where they declare first. There are only 6 people in the village, but they declare first. So historically, the first result you get comes from Dixville Notch, New Hampshire. I had never heard of it before. I'm not embarrassed to say that. I'm good, but I'm not that good. And my friend James Ball, who is a political anorak, was following it very closely. And he pointed out shortly after their declaration that it had gone exactly 50-50. And 6 people live in a village. 50% of them, 3 of them voted for Kamala Harris, 3 of them voted for Donald Trump. And that's almost a sitcom pilot waiting to happen, isn't it? What would life be like in that village? But what was really interesting about it was that in 2020, it was 100% Joe Biden. So in 2020, 6 people voted for Joe Biden and no people voted for Donald Trump. Fast forward 2024, it's 50-50. And that is the nugget that we have failed. That's the oyster we've failed to prise open on this program. The existence, the motivation of people who could move from one to the other, which you find almost unthinkable because you think that all that stuff matters. All that stuff about rape, all that stuff about felonies, all that stuff about national security advisors and military chiefs and former vice presidents. You presume it matters to the point where it crowds out all other concerns. Spoiler alert, it really doesn't. You can conclude, if you must, that a majority of the American electorate today It was the same 6 people as well, Bruce, which I thought fascinating because 3 of them can make that extraordinary move, a move that remains possibly unthinkable to many of us. But one of the most influential commentators in America, Joe Rogan, whose podcast reaches parts that traditional media can only dream of, has been on an almost identical journey. Quite extraordinary to reflect upon things he said about Barack Obama. Well, I'm going to play it to you, actually. I've never played any Joe Rogan. Reuters did a thing recently that found he was by far the most influential political commentator in America online. You'll never guess who the UK equivalent was. I'll give you a clue. He has a fraction of the traction that Joe Rogan enjoys, but I'm doing my best. And so you get that notion that it doesn't matter. It doesn't crowd out the scandal. It doesn't crowd out the crime. It doesn't even crowd out the sex offending. So what's the third thing? And you're going to have to allow me, because my inner schoolboy is never far from the service. You're going to have to allow me to say that was quite the swing in Dixville. But the third element of the conversation is the thing that Simon Marks and I touched upon at the end of yesterday's programme, which was, in many ways, it kind of stayed with me on the way home. I nearly inserted a caveat while we were talking about it, but I didn't, because it was true. And it's the weirdest element, perhaps, of all. So Simon and I yesterday concluded that in many ways, and you need to listen to the end of this, because at first glance it might seem very, very strange. In many ways, the worst thing that could happen in yesterday's election, if you were to step back and try to focus on the biggest picture of all, the worst thing that could happen would be a very narrow victory for Kamala Harris. Because that would, as many people feared and predicted, that would propel January the 6th Mark II. That would propel another attempted insurrection, probably it would make the last January the 6th look like a dress rehearsal. And this is the bit I find weirdest. That didn't overcome all of the other issues either. So even that fear, which you talk about now, Simon and I talked about it so casually, so sort of normally. Well, of course, the big fear is that if Kamala Harris wins by a narrow margin, he'll probably attempt another coup, and this time he might succeed. And we talk about that so blithely, so casually. Could you imagine 10 years ago, 2 relatively qualified or informed commentators or watchers of politics on either side of the Atlantic? Could you imagine 2 people talking about avoiding the possibility of an attempted coup being a very real factor in election analysis? And just casually saying to each other, well, that's a good thing, isn't it? I suppose that's a silver. So we actually said the best result would be a clear victory for either candidate. I don't know that a clear victory, a narrow victory for Trump wouldn't have changed anything. We'd be exactly where we are today. There is no prospect whatsoever of Kamala Harris announcing that she intends to ignore the election result or telling lies about votes. I mean, again, this weird narrative of relating facts in the context of an election result that says these facts don't matter to enough people. This is relatively uncharted territory. Even with Brexit, the realization that you'd been lied to was on the road ahead. The naive belief that facts would matter, that they would overcome feelings, that was all on the horizon. You're not going to get richer. There's not going to be 350 million quid for the NHS. They're not going to suddenly start deporting every brown person on the tills in Tesco's. They're not. All of that stuff that propelled Brexit over the line was an extraordinary con trick. But this is all in the rearview mirror, and it doesn't matter. And this is what you have to cling to. It doesn't matter enough. It doesn't matter enough. The fact that he tried to steal the last election, the fact that he was prepared to subvert the entire democratic process up to and including the potential assault upon his own vice president. the disowning of his most senior former colleagues, the condemnation of his former military chief, the use of the F word by his former chief of staff, the condemnation from his own national security advisor. None of it mattered. Brackets enough. And that is why I think we've struggled in the last couple of weeks, whenever we've turned our attention to this American election, to get to the bottom of it. I think we got closest yesterday. I thought that the question of what is it about America that we don't understand was the closest we got to acknowledging that there's something going on that turns a lot of our presumptions upside down. One thing, for example, and this has resonance in some elements of British politics. If you're a second or third generation immigrant in America, you are not going to be necessarily any more casual towards the rhetoric, the anti-immigrant rhetoric of Donald Trump than you are if you can trace your lineage back to the Mayflower. If you are prioritizing your personal financial health over everything else, and someone is telling you that your personal financial health is being compromised by immigration, most obviously illegal, but of course it's always a very, very short hop to legal immigration, getting hit with the same attack lines, then you're not going to think, well, my granddad was an immigrant. You're not even going to think my dad was an immigrant. Just look at some of the people who have risen in the Conservative Party in recent years. You're going to think, well, actually, no, they're a threat to me as well. So those three things, I still can't quite unravel or riddle. So the Dixville thing is easy. That was me naively thinking, oh, well, the game's up. If three people can shift out of six, if 50% of a tiny and probably unrepresentative electorate can make such a huge leap from pro-Biden to pro-Trump, then I think the game is up for Kamala Harris. Mateless telling me a year ago that the priority for many of the people she was talking to was the price of petrol at the pumps. I don't want to describe liberal discombobulations about things like rape and election theft. I don't want to describe that as a luxury, but it's clear that for a majority of the American election, none of this matters enough. It doesn't matter enough. It's dispiriting but grimly predictable that people like Suella Braverman can share their views on this without being asked questions about things like rape and election theft, and can say things about the left describing him as a fascist when in fact it was his own national security advisor. But that's a failure of media in this country that has been in place since long before 2016. But the electorate don't care enough about these things to overshadow or overcome their fears, I think, first about the economy and second about immigration. But I don't think you can separate those two things. If you know, you've seen it happen here. Don't look up, look down. The reason why your financial situation is not as healthy as you would like it to be is because of the people that mow your lawn and deliver your food. It's not because of the people who run the country or the people that own Twitter or the people that own Amazon. It's because of him over there delivering your tacos. Little nod to my American listeners there. And that is where I am at 21 minutes after 10 this morning. Very, very simply, none of the stuff matters enough. And that is why, look, Daniel Finkelstein is a conservative member of the House of Lords, the founder of one of the think tanks that became a kind of madrasa for conservative politicians, a very close ally of David Cameron and George Osborne, a key part of the process that propelled them to the very forefront of the Conservative Party. Therefore, he is someone with whom I would hardly ever disagree. And yet, I beg your pardon, hardly ever agree. And yet, the point he makes is, I think, inarguable. An alarming number of people don't care at all about liberal democratic norms, as long as things are all right for them, or as long as they think that the person trashing liberal democratic norms is going to be good for them, has their interests at heart. Whether that's true or not is immaterial. It's moot, isn't it? I'll read that to you again. An alarming number of people don't care at all about liberal democratic norms as long as things are all right for them. And they rather think, quotes, strongman, end quotes, rule. Personal note, the weirdest thing about Donald Trump support is the notion that he's some sort of strongman when he's an incredibly thin-skinned man-child. But maybe all strongmen through history were. They just had good PR. They think that this strongman rule might be better than rule by a load of squabbling politicians. They like that Trump, or they believe that Trump is a successful and ruthless businessman. They like that he belittles other people. They think he's doing it on their behalf. And I won't share with you yet Finkelstein's evidence that this applies in the UK as well, because I need to get a phone-in up and running. Well, I think I do. You know me. It's one of those days. I'd quite happily talk uninterrupted until 12 noon today, but I don't know that that's necessarily what you've tuned in for. Some of you tell me that you have, and that's very kind. But we need to puzzle this stuff together. So I don't think you can argue with that conclusion. An alarming number of people, enough people to elect a president, don't care at all about liberal democratic norms. As long as, and then you can insert whatever sentence you want here to take you back to where this introduction began, as long as it brings down the price of petrol. As long as it improves my spending power in Walmart. As long as it makes me feel better about myself. An alarming number of people, a majority probably of the popular vote in America, do not care at all about liberal democratic norms, as long as things are all right for them. And remember, this article, which I heartily recommend, was written before the results came in. I'll give you one statistic. This is from a bit of polling that was done for a British think tank. Support for a strong leader who doesn't have to bother with parliament or elections was at 46%. So we're living in a world where enough people to deliver election victories do not care, actively reject liberal democratic norms. Eleanor's just written the word time in 6-inch high letters on the screen in front of me, which I think is a fair comment. Time, gentlemen, please. So what do we do about that? Well, I mean, what do we do about that? If you don't care about liberal democratic norms, I see you. I know you. You're tuning in to hear me have a breakdown or to feast on my liberal tears. But for those of us who do care, what do we do with the news? What do we do with the discovery that most Americans don't? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
8 minutes after 10 is the time. Listen, it's tempting, isn't it, to dedicate at least 10 minutes of the programme to Idiot's Corner today. But I don't know that we can do that. We perhaps let them have their moment in the sun. At some point, the rejection of liberal democratic norms on a scale great enough to deliver the nuclear codes to the soon-to-be, once again, most powerful man on the planet. All you can do is cross your fingers and hope that the stuff that would make you realise what a terrible, terrible thing that was to do never happens. But this is Brexit Britain, where the admission that you've done something really, really stupid at the ballot box, even when the evidence becomes incontrovertible, remains almost impossible for some people to undertake. I think for the third or fourth time in history, I'm going to hit the 10:30 news without having taken a single call. But rest assured, we'll be staying with this subject matter until 12 noon today, when PMQs is upon us. And Kemi Badenoch, who did one thing yesterday that I think we could all be grateful for, she did rather challenge the widespread perception that she has no sense of humour. You're going to Google this because you'll think I'm yanking your chain, but she's made Mark Francois a minister, and she will be conducting her first PMQs opposite Keir Starmer, who of course has issued a very wholesome message of congratulation to Donald Trump. Today may not be the day for digging into the complicated nature of that transatlantic relationship, given the way in which Donald Trump represents a rejection of traditional liberal democratic norms. But I mean, goodness me, the words of Keir Starmer, the warm words of Keir Starmer, you compare them to the statement from the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is an almost perfect illustration of why politics is not quite as straightforward as some people would have you believe, including, I fear, Donald Trump himself. But first, Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 10. A quick apology to anybody who was tuning in, having followed me on Twitter, expecting today's programme to be dedicated to potholes, parking tickets, gallons of Liberal tears and the pedestrianisation of Norwich City Centre. We've postponed that programme now until tomorrow. We concern ourselves instead, not with Liberal tears, but with what are, internationally or widely regarded as liberal democratic norms, the stuff that matters. Like not being a rapist, like not stealing elections, like not being the most dangerous man in the world, according to your own military chief. All of the stuff that many, many people, myself included, naively presumed would trump, if you pardon the pun, anything and everything else. We do not live in that world. What world do we live in? And how do those of us who still care about liberal democratic norms respond to the irrefutable evidence that we are currently in a minority? Alistair is in Chelmsford. Alistair, what would you like to say?
Oh, morning, James. A good show as ever. I thought this was going to be a very lively one, so I thought I'd get in there early.
Well, you're lucky to get on at all the way I was feeling 5 minutes ago, but go on, fill your boots.
No, I've got a friend who's US military. He's been an arch Democrat, especially in 2016. He was very anti-Trump, who I spoke to fairly recently, and he was very pro-Trump. He's moved from California, now his home state, where he's seen it decline quite rapidly. And he's now out of the service, and he was expressing, places like Ukraine and so on, the Middle East, it's far away from a lot of the...
Why are we sending money there when my hometown looks very tatty and shabby around the edges?
It's crazy. He showed me some videos, I've never known about tent cities and stuff like that. And the homeless problem. And of course, when you've got a family to feed, people are just caring about, a loaf of bread over there is $9. My brother went on holiday to Florida last year, and he was absolutely horrified at the price of just basic groceries when they were staying in a little house out there. And I'm not surprised by what's happened. And I think the Liberals they couldn't even answer a question of what is a woman, which people think is insane. It's never going to help them in a campaign.
Do you think that matters? I mean, it's a question that right-wing journalists desperate to distract attention from what right-wing politicians are actually doing are very keen to ask people. But do you really think that matters enough to forgive? Hang on, let me to forgive, for example, rape.
I mean, that I do think at the minute with the rape and all the criminal accusation, I don't know enough about what's gone on, and I'm not an avid...
Well, I'll tell you, he's been convicted of multiple felonies and found by a court to have raped a woman. So if people are telling the truth when they talk about the transgender issue in the context of women's rights, this is why I can't quite make sense of this element of the conversation, but it's by no means confined to you. I'm okay with the rape, but I'm not okay with the trans rights.
No, from my point of view, in the sense that I've been in the UK with my daughter. I've got a daughter at school, and I wasn't happy with that conversation. Her age.
No, I'm thinking about your friend who was in the military. So he's raised this notion of transgender rights, and he's voted for a rapist.
From what I can see, he's basically considered the price in his fuel tank, being able to put food on the table for his family as a priority, and the safety in the streets is their priority that he was obviously looking at. And
that is why, given the choice, he might be in favour, especially with his background, of a sort of military rule, which is where the statistics in Daniel Finkelstein's piece get really scary. Among voters aged between 18 and 34 in the UK, support for rule by the military was at 44%.
I'm definitely again, I'm not an avid follower of the politics of the situation, what is going on. I'm busy running my own business and so, but I get people my concerns are, I think what a lot of middle Americans, whatever you want to call them, general people out of the political loop just want to have a more comfortable, peaceful life.
I get that. I do. That's why I mentioned Emily Maitlis a year ago talking to us about petrol. How you get... I mean, the problem is, as soon as you say these things, which I think are demonstrably true, at least in terms of what people think they believe, how do you get a more peaceful life? By putting the man that tried to steal an election using violence, painted a kind of murder target on his own vice president's back, unleashed a violent and armed mob upon the actual capital. I want a more peaceful America. I'm going to vote for the man that tried to launch a coup. I'm really cross about transgender rights. I'm going to vote because I care about women. I'm going to vote for a rapist. Do you see what I mean? This is where I think the claims that these are genuine concerns or that these are major concerns begin to look a little bit shabby. I would like to thank America, however, for conspiring to ensure that we get to announce live on this programme the final furlong, if you like, of the American presidential election. He has now secured more than the 270 electoral votes needed. This comes from the American network LBC and elsewhere. So officially, Donald Trump will return to the White House after claiming what is, by any measure and whatever your politics, an objectively stunning victory over his opponent, Kamala Harris. We're going to dig into the whys and wherefores of it, I suspect, if we've got time today, but we're interested first in the initial ramification that Alistair has touched on, and I think helpfully highlighted the immediate hypocrisy of many of these positions. I want peace, so I'm voting for the man who endorses violence. I want women's rights, so I'm voting for the rapist. I want to feel wealthier, maybe so I'm voting for the man that promises me I'll be wealthier, rather than the administration, of course Joe Biden wasn't the candidate this time, that is widely regarded to have kind of defied global trends when it comes to handling of the economy in a positive way. So what does it mean to wake up in a world where liberal democratic norms no longer matter? 10:39 is the time, and Harriet is in Kingston. Harriet, what would you like to say?
Hi there. So I just wanted to say that when I was younger, I grew up on and off in the Bay Area. And when we first moved there from Scotland, I think, my parents were genuinely staggered to see that there was no international news. The news is local. The so-called CNN news is local. And a lot of America is incredibly insular. They don't hold passports. They watch their local news.
But a lot of America isn't, and they voted for Trump as well. I think in the UK, I usually say 15 to 20% can fall for that kind of lazy nativism, and in America the figure might be higher because of the demographic and geographical phenomena you describe, but it doesn't get you into the White House.
Well, I called Trump ages ago and genuinely wished that I'd put money on it.
Yes.
And I said to my husband, people genuinely just care about the gas pump prices and the prices.
But this is the closest we get to feeling reassured. They genuinely care about the gas pump prices, so much so that they don't care about the rape and the criminality and the rest of it, because the alternative is that they actually love all the rest of it.
But my genuine belief is that despite all of that, Americans just care literally about what is going on in their world, and particularly in places like North Carolina, where there is a heavy military basis. They just want to hear that the war is going to be fixed, and this hard man is going to come in, because look at the liberals, they've just done nothing. And I have friends still in California who my friend, my best friend at school, drives a forklift truck, and she posts about Trump all the time, but all the men in her family serve. They have their flag outside, and I guess that they don't think that Joe Biden is on their side. The petrol prices are too expensive, and that really is a big deal in America. The groceries are too expensive. A lot of people don't go on holiday, and so they don't really care what's going on outside of the world, as long as they know that their interests.
They think Donald Trump is on their side, and we could sit here all day wondering whether they are right to think that, but it doesn't matter. You don't cast your vote with an algorithm of evidence and facts in front of you. You cast your vote with your feelings and your instincts, and this guy is on my side, and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden
but the
are
problem
not.
with Kamala Harris was as well that she wasn't really an authentic candidate, because she came in so late in the day, literally to rescue the sort of disability of Joe Biden's campaign, and to me, for the last two elections, I keep saying to months, they're horrible candidates. Biden and Hillary, they're horrible candidates. Nobody is sort of forward-thinking and worldwide thinking. And even the fact that, I still do believe that most of America is very insular. Even with the advent of social media, people only look at the things they want to look at. They only want to look at the things that people want to look at. So they won't bother about what's going on here in France and Spain, the floods in Spain, for example. They just want to know that their tax dollars are not going to go towards a war that they can't even point to on a map. And in America as well, they don't learn international history. I went to junior high school there. I was taught to pledge my allegiance to their flag.
Okay.
I was wrote their national anthem, and they do not learn international politics. And their geography isn't international either, so you can't blame people for being a bit stunted in their thinking. I don't agree with it. I find it just awful.
And again, I stress that this applies to some of the people, some of the time, but there's no earthly way it applies to all of the people who have inserted Donald Trump into the White House. And I guess the point at which we stumble is the point at which we don't understand how anybody could want a man like that on their side, whatever promises he made. However imperfect the offer of a Joe Biden or a Kamala Harris or a Hillary Clinton may be, the caller that Nick had, oddly, not me, yesterday morning, which simply said, given a choice between the candidate who's a rapist and the candidate who isn't, I'm always going to go with the one who isn't. But that is obviously the wrong conversation. Speaking of the wrong conversation, Harriet, a brilliant contribution. Thank you. Yesterday's phone-in was about what are the things about America that the Brits don't understand or don't quite get, which was a sort of precursor to the result that's come in overnight, because it was clear that it was going to be perilously close. It was pretty clear to a lot of people, Harriet included, that Trump was more likely to get over the line than not, even with that little fillip of optimism that came with the replacement, the swapping out of Joe Biden for Kamala Harris. But to understand what has happened in America is to understand America. And so far, it's not particularly well reflected here. The numbers don't support support for Trump is not reflected here in the way that it is in America. I guess that could change, but I would like to think patriotically that perhaps we do still care a little bit more about democratic norms, about things like criminality, about things like personal depravity, about things like sex offending in the person of our senior politicians than America does. But I wouldn't put my house on it.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It is official. Donald Trump will be the 47th President of the United States of America. A special prize for anyone who can tell me the last, I always get the name wrong. Is it Grover Washington or something like that? No, I've probably just named a jazz musician. I think it's happened before. I think someone has lost after one term and come back for a third bite of the cherry and won on the. I don't think he's the first to do that, but anyway, he's now up to 279 electoral college votes, and he needed 270 to win, which, when it comes to what we're talking about today, is the moment at which I remind you there is absolutely no prospect whatsoever of Kamala Harris, including her supporters, I beg your pardon, encouraging her supporters to take up arms and attack the Capitol. I mean, it is beyond the realms of even the vaguest possibility. Whenever I say something like that on the radio, there's always a tiny little voice in my head going, Are you sure? Yes, I'm pretty sure. No, I'm 101% sure that Kamala Harris, either today or come January, is not going to encourage her supporters to launch a murderous attack upon the American Parliament buildings and indeed call for the blood of her political not even her political rival. She'd have to be calling for her own blood, because it will fall to Kamala Harris as vice president to rubber stamp the inauguration of Donald Trump as president. So, Grover Cleveland. Thank you, Mark. Pub quiz fans. There you go. That's the last president who did what Trump has done today. But that there is the crux of the conversation that we're having, the gulf that exists between people who presume that this stuff matters. You launch a coup against your own country, against your own democratically elected president, you're probably going to be persona non grata with most voters forever. Donald Trump does it, he's not. I don't know that we'll ever. So you can do the slightly patronising, anti-clever analysis of it, as some people have done. Some people who I think are sometimes a little bit too close to politics. The difference between GDP and personal finances, the real concerns about immigration, whether they are justified or not, in the terms of, if we abolished all immigration tomorrow, would you be better off? Would your life be improved? But people believe it. So all of these long lists of things that explain why Donald Trump has won never explain the bit that Daniel Finkelstein has had a crack at today, which is the bit about millions and millions and millions of Americans. And of course, we've got Donald Trump supporters in our parliament in this country who don't care enough about the things that we grew up thinking everybody cared about. The criminality, the sex offending, the opinions of very, very close allies, the condemnations from everybody ever who's worked closely with him. So what does he do? Hey, I just dust myself down and start all over again. But there it is. 10:51 is the time. The nicest thing you can say, the warmest thing you can say at the moment is that you can be 100% certain that Kamala Harris won't try and launch a coup against Donald Trump. And yet they voted for the guy that you couldn't have said that about confidently if the result had gone the other way. Riddle me that. Chris is in Brighton. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Bear with me. I've been up all night, so I haven't had much sleep. I just wanted to talk to you about the point that you were making about why Americans seem prepared to sort of vote for Trump, despite all of the kind of misdemeanors and the kind of fraudulent behaviours and the kind of egregious behaviour towards women. And I think personally, I think it's because essentially they're not faced with it when they're consuming media. They're not confronted with what he's done on a regular basis. And I had some personal kind of experience of this from the other side, which was when I first started watching the election coverage, I was kind of getting a lot of my information from people like the Midas Touch Network, Keith Edwards, Luke Beasley, the Lincoln Project. And it's just telling you every day, every hour of every day, that Trump's chaos, that his campaign is falling apart, that Kamala Harris is going to win. And you just kind of, it's just through osmosis, it just kind of seeps into you that that's what's going to happen. And unless you take yourself out of that, you can't see that actually she is a very clever, very charming woman, but she wasn't a particularly great campaigner. She did disastrously badly in 2020. And you know, it just stops. You're not forced to confront the weaknesses in her campaign. And I think that's what's happening on the right, is that they're just watching people like Tim Pool. They're watching people like, you know, Newsmax, you know, InfoWars. And then they're not talking about, you know, all of these court cases in any other terms other than it's a part of a mass deep state conspiracy against Trump.
And that would include Mike Pence, would it? That would include former national security advisor. That would include former chief of staff. That would include former military chief. But again, as with Harriet, this works for a proportion of these people. But there are plenty of people with their eyes wide open who do follow a lot of media. I'm not a massive a consumer of Joe Rogan's podcast, but you cannot underestimate its importance. I guess he's the closest in terms of influence, although his politics are very different. He's the closest that my generation has to a sort of Rush Limbaugh figure in the United States of America in terms of getting a vote out or getting people politically engaged. And he's been on a journey. We'll have a listen to that journey in the next hour of the program. But none of this analysis explains somebody like Joe Rogan.
No, but again, Joe Rogan isn't talking. I mean, Joe Rogan is part of a network, and he's obviously the most successful one, but he's part of a network of kind of commentators where it's presenting this image of kind of conservative values. Well, Rogan's a little bit more apolitical than, say, someone like Tim Pool, but it's kind of like...
He was pretty cutting about Trump last time round, certainly even after January the 7th, incredibly cutting about...
He was, definitely, but I mean, he certainly wasn't this time, and he was flirting with the idea of having him on his show for a number of months leading up to him eventually appearing. But the point I'm trying to make is, I suppose, is that, you know, albeit they're aware of it, and, you know, I am an American myself. I was born in Virginia. I don't, you know, obviously have lived in this country for a long time, but my experience of Republican voters who are on the moderate side of things and are aware of his weaknesses is that they're aware of it, but then it becomes a sort of cognitive dissonance space where they're just sort of parking it in the dark recesses of their mind and focusing, especially younger men, on the kind of the positive aspects of conservative values. And for them, it's about being kind of like successful conservatives, bringing in money, crypto investments, you know, successful with women, all of those sorts of things. And Trump has very cleverly, or certainly the people advising him have very cleverly aligned him with those group of people. And they're not thinking about sexual assault or whether he's a fraudster or any of these other things, or, you know, insurgencies or anything like that. They're just thinking about, culture wars and just being on the right side of those kind of...
And they don't generally have those positions examined very enthusiastically. They don't generally find themselves having to explain how they can claim that they're in favour of women's rights on trans issues while voting for a rapist, or that they're in favour of peace and stability while voting for the instigator of a coup. I think cognitive dissonance is a horribly overused phrase, but like all horribly overused phrases, occasionally it fits like a glove. And that's what you're describing. I mean, almost all of the people, some of the characters that text me possibly would be not in this category, but almost all of the people, if you gave them a truth serum and asked them what they think about rapists or what they think about people launching coups against their own democratically elected government, would think they were passionately opposed to it, right?
Well, you'd think so, but I mean,
and here they are.
I can't remember the guys. Yeah, here they are, and they're making different choices in other aspects of their lives. I mean, a really interesting... I can't remember the guy's name, but he was on Bill Maher a few weeks ago.
God, you do consume your American media, don't you?
I do, and I try and consume as many different types.
Let me ask you a question then. Sorry to interrupt you. Before you tell me what happened on Bill Maher, how shocked are you by what's happened overnight?
If you'd asked me about a month ago, I would have been shocked. But in the last couple of weeks, I was feeling that Trump was on the rise, personally.
Yeah, I think I'm the same, although I've only started following it really closely in the last couple of weeks for reasons I can't fully understand. What happened on the Bill Maher show that you were about to allude to?
So there's a former advisor to, I think it was Jeb Bush. He's a communications specialist, and he was talking about how people like Ben Shapiro, if they were asked to put their child into a school and the headmaster was a convicted rapist and fraudster, they would choose not to do that because obviously that's not where they want their children. But yet they're making this kind of weird choice to have this person as the president of the United States of America. And it's a big, big risk. And I think they're aware of it, but for whatever reason, they're sort of, for a variety of very complex reasons, they're just sort of ignoring it. And it's just... I find it deeply frustrating.
I'm going to dig that out. Can you? If you remember who it is, just give Eleanor another ring or drop me a tweet or something. I'd love to see that idea that they wouldn't want him as headmaster of their children's school, but they'll have him as president for reasons. Because you have to hope that it's true, don't you? You have to believe that it's true, because otherwise they'd want your children's headmaster to be the fraudster rapist.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's my cognitive dissonance, which is that I'm just desperate to believe that there's some sort of underlying rationale in
what
my
about that? Let me read you this from Alex. It's only the last couple of lines that I want you to respond to, given how much attention you've paid to things. James, really love your show. Here are my thoughts on the race for the White House. Within my thought processes, I'm applying the keep it simple process. So that would be close to Occam's razor. Alex writes, America is just not ready to have a woman as a president yet. A lot was stacked against Trump winning, and yet he will be president. Only 2 women have stood in my lifetime. Both have failed. Kamala Harris has come closest yet. Is it? Do you think that we talked about this a bit yesterday in the context of Vox Pops, and you never know how representative they are, but frequently reflecting the idea that we don't want a woman president yet. Is that a part of the America that a lot of Brits don't understand?
Oh, 100%.
Oh, really?
You can't underplay the level of misogyny that both of those candidates have had to come against. But equally, you also can't underplay the lack of sophistication in both of their campaigns as well.
Very much so.
Particularly Harris's.
Yes.
Clinton was the kind of the first adopter, the first run, and she made some mistakes, and they were understandable. For Harris to have made the same
mistakes again. on a when the stakes are even higher. I think between us, we've just actually married the topic of conversation in the first hour of this program quite perfectly to the whole election, because in a sense that complacency, if that's the right word to use, is born of the idea that not being the bloke with the multiple felonies, not being the bloke disowned by his former vice president, not being the bloke condemned by his national security advisor, not being the bloke called a fascist by his former chief of staff, not being the bloke described as the most dangerous person ever by his own former military chief, not being the bloke who's been found by a court to have raped a woman, that does breed a certain complacency in which if you were the candidate, you'd think, well, that's all I have to be is not him.
But look at where a lot of those comments are coming from. I mean, that's another big mistake that she made, was this idea that the way to get Republicans on side, or moderate Republicans on side, was to suddenly, align yourself with Dick Cheney and John Bolton, who are probably in no small part responsible for the fact that Trump was able to hijack that party. These are not
in the Beltway. It feels like a win. We've got these guys endorsing us and condemning Trump. Outside the Beltway, it either doesn't land at all or it doesn't make sense.
I think it was deeply unpopular, and I thought I can't repeat what Jon Stewart said on The Daily Show, but I think there was a response that was needed to Dick Cheney, and it wasn't the one that was given.
That's a really good point. It's a really good point. Thank you. Quick word. Thank you, Chris. Quick word to Tony, who's been in touch to say, people like you are what's wrong with this country, James. Finally, something on which we can all agree.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 5 minutes after 11. If you're just joining me, somewhat improbably, I began today's programme with three names, Mateless, Marks and Dixville. Dixville being the little place in New Hampshire that posts its election results first and gave me an indication quite early last night that things were going to go Donald Trump's way. There are only 6 residents of this village, and in 2020 they all voted for Joe Biden. Yesterday 3 of them voted for Kamala Harris and 3 of them voted for Donald Trump. And I just thought those are the people that we don't understand. The people who can look at the choice between, and I'm not going to read you the long list of Donald Trump's egregious transgressions again, but they can vote knowingly for that. And we are the people perhaps most baffled, most befuddled this morning. Listening to our news, looking at some polling of how America has responded to this. The other 2 reasons, by the way, Mateless and Marks. Mateless because she told me a year ago, shortly after landing in America, when I asked her what people are up to, what people are talking about politically, she was struck by how many people were talking about the price of petrol, which is both a fact and also a perfect analogy for the cost of living, or the pound, the dollar in your pocket. And then the thing that I think best distills this sort of the grounds for a form of despair would be the conversation I had with Simon Marks yesterday. If you need to mark how far the needle has moved, how uncharted these waters are for Western democracies, certainly in the from the post-war period onwards, then you would have to hear Simon and I talking very casually yesterday about how, well, in many ways, it would be a good thing if the victory was quite clear. Because a narrow victory for Kamala Harris, even if you wanted it desperately, would have opened the door to January the 6th 2.0. And this time he might have pulled it off. And that, I think, is the best illustration of how bonkers this conversation is, how bonkers American politics is. You're looking at your greatest ally historically. You're looking at the most powerful country in the world. And you're thinking, well, maybe it'd be better. Maybe it'd be better if the guy I think is awful won. Because if he lost, he might try to steal the election again. And that would be even worse than anything he could do if he won. You see the trouble with that logic. But, I mean, you're nodding along. You know it's true. Unless, of course, you're comfortable with people stealing elections, in which case I'm not sure yet whether or not you're aware of what that looks like historically. 8 minutes after 11 is the time. So if the liberal democratic norms do not matter, or at least they do not matter to enough people enough of the time, where does that leave us? What does that say about the world? How did this happen is a conversation that we had long before it happened, and we had it on many, many different occasions. But this idea that we look at appalling things and presume that they're deal breakers is wrong. They're not deal breakers. But you can't abandon the belief or the conviction that they should be. So what do you do? Paul Krugman is an award-winning, Nobel Prize-winning economist, writes op-eds for the New York Times sometimes. He's already responded in some ways to this question. He says, don't ask whose fault this was. Plenty of time for second-guessing and recriminations. Ask instead, what can you do? For my part, that means telling the truth as I see it, as long as I can. The media will be under a lot of pressure to toe the line. Don't capitulate in advance. And I think by towing the line, he means normalising what Donald Trump represents, because he has this incredible mandate. That's not an opinion, that's counting. He's got an incredible mandate now to do whatever he wants in America. And yet he is all of the things that we know him to be. So what you can't do, I don't think, and I think this is the point that Krugman is making, what you can't do, however tempting it is sort of go, oh, well, that's the new reality. That's the world we live in. Rape doesn't matter. Stealing elections is not a deal breaker. And being condemned in the roundest terms by almost all of your closest allies ever, last time you were in power, is not something that we should focus on as we approach the next period of power. I think that it's tempting, isn't it? Because everybody likes an easy life. It's almost as if Paul Krugman is saying, don't stop being horrified. And then you're reminded of some of the articles that appeared last time he got into the White House. Donald Trump won't be as bad as you think is one that Andrew Neil published. Donald Trump won't be as bad as you think. I mean, the mad reality in 2024 is Donald Trump was much, much worse than all of the most hysterical predictions suggested he would be. And America have just put him back in the White House. Riddle me that. 0345 6060973. And this was my trail at 9:45 this morning. I hesitate to ask this question, but what is the worst that could happen? I want you to put some flesh on the bones of that question. So I think Vladimir Putin would have been raising a glass last night, don't you? I think the idea of Volodymyr Zelensky continuing to enjoy the support of the United States of America is disappearing over the horizon. I suspect, despite all of his incredibly febrile local difficulties, which we'll be talking about at about 12:30 with our correspondent in Jerusalem, Benjamin Netanyahu will be very happy with this result. So Vladimir Putin, Benjamin Netanyahu, you heard talk of Viktor Orban being very happy with this result. In the context of the Brits, the UK, or the broader global picture, what is the worst that can happen? Commercially, if he brings in tariffs, as he has threatened to do, we will suffer enormously. The research on that from our economic experts is pretty close to incontrovertible. But what is the worst that can happen? Sometimes that's a soothing, a calming thought. I read Alexei Navalny's book, Patriot, which is an extraordinary read. You heard an interview with his widow Yulia last week, and Alexei had two tactics for dealing with despair. And remember, this is a man that was poisoned several times by Vladimir Putin, jailed and ultimately murdered. And of course, one of the questions he was constantly asked was, how do you do it? How do you keep going? And one of the answers he gave, one was faith, actually, which is a conversation for another day. But the other one he gave was, you just need to imagine what is the worst that can happen, up to and including his own murder. And the more you think about it, the less frightening it becomes. I think in therapeutic terms, it's called sort of sitting with your pain. The world turns, life goes on. This too shall pass. We are, in the great scheme of things, we're grains of sand on an enormous beach, so none of this matters. So the more you think about what's the worst that can happen, it's not like the species is, well, I was going to say, it's not like the species is going to have its extinction accelerated, but of course anybody remotely informed on climate change matters would be right to worry. Anybody supportive of Ukraine would be right to worry. Anybody who recognises the importance of science, particularly in the context of healthcare, would be right to worry, because Donald Trump has talked about putting a man who is a vaccine conspiracy theorist in charge of American healthcare. What is the worst? You might struggle to get through, but please try. Be patient. I'll stop talking so I can squeeze in some more calls. But whether this turns up the volume on the despair, or whether it turns it down, only time will tell. But what is the worst that could happen? Plausibly, in your opinion. 0345 606 973 is the number you need. Lisa is in Islington. Lisa, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Sorry,
Hello,
I've also absolutely gutted and been up all night, and yes, bear with me for a second.
Of course.
I personally, as a liberal lefty myself, I think one of the key things is that the Democratic Party, I think they were probably a little bit too cocky, should I say. There's kind of a sense of not really understanding and being far removed from the cohort that has gone to Donald Trump, which is, what young white men,
yes,
Latinos, and like working class, and obviously the moderate Republican or independent Republican. I think the whole definition of the elite Washington is really tainted, American politics, and is kind of left a bit of disdain to kind of the average Joe. This
is his sort of diabolical genius, isn't it? Jeff Bezos instructed his newspapers not to come out in favour of Kamala Harris. Elon Musk is the richest man in the world and essentially became a cheerleader for Donald Trump. Someone else, of course, who had beef with him in the past. Although his business success is nothing like it is portrayed, it's largely a creation of the Apprentice television programme. What is the elite, if not a gang that contains Trump, Bezos and Musk? And yet people buy it. They buy the idea that he's anti all that stuff.
But it's because I think with the Democrats, it's so overt. Getting Taylor Swift to endorse you and getting Beyonce on the stage and J-Lo on the average Joe doesn't care about any of that. It's actually kind of, it would make them resentful to be like, I don't care about whether Beyonce is, endorsing you. She's a millionaire. She doesn't have my struggles. She doesn't care about the fact that petrol is God knows how much money. And I think you're right.
The Republicans get Hulk Hogan or Kid Rock on stage. It's not the same because they're slightly ridiculous figures, and yet you take the most successful. In fact, you might as well have got Spider-Man on the stage. People might love these people. They might buy their records. They might go to their concerts, but they don't think they live in the same universe, do they?
Of course, it doesn't align. So again, kind of feels like the Democratic Party isn't listening to the electorate. So I think that was the massive big reason they missed out a cohort.
I think
there is misogyny and racism. I'm sorry, but it is.
Yes.
But I think at the same time, if I was, as a black woman, if I was in the jungle and I was being chased by a lion, the first thing I'm going to do is run away from the lion. I'm not going to look at the lion and be like, are you racist? What are your equal rights? Like, let's talk about how you feel about what's going on in the world. I'm actually going to running away from survival. Especially people who come to America to live the American dream. That's why I think a lot of people of colour are voting for Trump. They don't care about, everything that we talk about as lefties, human rights and trans rights and gay rights and women's rights. That they see that as a privilege. It's like you guys could think about stuff like that because you don't have to worry about where your next paycheck's coming from.
But how much of that is true? And how much of that is what they are told by the politicians who are pursuing their votes? Because I don't know if you're aware of this, but I am the conscience of liberal Britain, Lisa, according to the New Statesman. And I hardly ever talk about the things that you've just mentioned. I mean, I have strong opinions on most of those issues, but the bread and butter of a program like this is talking about the stuff that's actually happening. We do quite a lot on racism, but it's always evidence-based and fact-based. The idea that we're prioritizing, I think that is, and it doesn't matter.
It's the optics, though, isn't it?
Yeah, precisely. Someone keeps telling you this lot are obsessed with trans rights, for example, or this lot are obsessed with pride, police officers wearing pride helmets. The evidence doesn't have to exist for the accusation to land.
Yeah, absolutely. If I've just come over with my family, from, I don't know, Cuba or, because obviously apparently looking at the stats now, it's Latino voters that move the most to Trump.
Yes.
So if they're kind of going, I've just moved over with my family 5 years ago, trying to build something for myself, get something for myself, make money, not pay as much taxes. They're not going to be looking at TV and talking about women's rights and abortion. And this is all the stuff that we're so passionate about.
But they hadn't. Abortion is different. No, abortion is different. I mean, people are very, very passionate about.
I thought that would move the needle.
Everyone said it would. Everyone said the women were going to come out.
I genuinely thought.
I think she's 10 points ahead on women, and Joe Biden was 11 points ahead. So even that hasn't landed. And I think everything you say is true, with that little caveat that a lot of it is hogwash. Donald Trump stands on a stage and says, a boy goes to school and he comes back a girl. It's a complete lie, but it plays into the narrative that you describe. And the narrative doesn't have to be true to be effective. God knows, we're the country of Brexit.
Absolutely. But if you are sitting there and your petrol is $22 a gallon, and then there's Beyonce on stage saying, you need to vote for Kamala Harris, the optics of it is that actually, they don't care about.
We talked about this this morning. We did talk about this morning. This idea that they think it's a massive win. They think it's a jackpot, but actually, it is like having Superman on stage. It's superheroes. It's like having the Marvel Universe on stage. I love these guys. These guys are great, but I don't care what they think about American politics because they don't live in the world that I inhabit. They're superheroes. That's Bruce. Even Bruce Springsteen, Lisa, the sort of patron saint of blue collar America. Even he comes out with a full-throated support for Kamala Harris, and people just see a multimillionaire who is not affected by the things that they're affected by. Donald Trump isn't going to help them at all, but he keeps telling them that he will. And they believe him, or at least they think it's worth a roll of the dice. And it's a big enough issue, and this is what takes us back to where the conversation started. It's a big enough issue to ignore all the other stuff. And that's the bit. I started the program thinking, how do we deal with that? How do we learn to move on from it? I don't want to. I never want to ignore that stuff. I never want to approach an election thinking that it's a fair fight between the rapist and the non-rapist, between the criminal and the non-criminal. That way, all the real madness lies, doesn't it? I won't do any more Trump impersonations, Carl, because you're quite right. They are absolutely shocking. But that's the point. That's the Orwell line, yeah? That there is truth and there is untruth. If you can hold on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad, or words to that effect. You sit here thinking, and I think that's the point Paul Krugman is making, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, when he talks about telling the truth as you see it for as long as you can. The media will be under a lot of pressure to toe the line. Don't capitulate in advance. To toe what line? Or to toe the line that says, well, this is the new world order. We have to accept that people don't care about having prime ministers or presidents who are sex offenders, who are felons, who are held in the lowest possible regard by all of their former allies. I think you have to, even if you go down screaming, you have to stay loyal to what you know to be true. Countries shouldn't be governed by rapists. Full stop. America is about to be. Again. Semicolon. Julie's in Seattle. Julie, what would you like to say? Oh, no, we better take a break first.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're just chewing the fat together, surveying the wreckage, or indeed celebrating the triumph of Donald Trump. I don't think today is a big day for Idiot's Corner, but I get a significant number of messages saying, I'm loving this, James is having a breakdown, or James is liberal to all of this stuff. Listen, they're listening to the same radio show that you're listening to. But it takes me back to that first penny drop moment that we had with regard to Donald Trump. It was when the kind of people who send texts like that still had some confidence to actually ring in and have their opinions examined live on the radio. And it was when Donald Trump was giving a speech in London, and we could see on the screen while he was talking what the scenes outside were like. And he was describing these enormous crowds that had gathered outside to watch him give a speech in London. And we had cameras on the outside, and there was nobody there. And we did a phone-in on the success of the lie, as it were, why you would believe the lie. My friend Gary reminded me of this a couple of days ago, but I don't think I mentioned it on the show. The guy who rang in and said, I know he's a liar, but I love it because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan. And I forgot about that for a long time. But I'm thinking about it occasionally today. What are you actually celebrating if your big win is that people who hate rape are upset? If your big win is that people who are anti-crime and anti-fraud and anti-lies are upset, what is it you're really celebrating? And imagine I was having some sort of meltdown and you were genuinely enjoying it. What would you be actually enjoying? Oh, yes, the people who hate rapists have finally got their cup. I mean, who are you? Who are you celebrating? The kind of disappointment or upset? It's weird, right? Maybe I'll never quite understand that. But that idea of I love it. I know he's a liar, but I love it because it upsets people who hate liars. It's a very strange psychological position to be in, but a very real one, apparently. 26 after 11 is the time. Julie is in Seattle. Julie, what would you like to say?
Hey, James.
Hey, Julie.
I've been up for a while at this point. I haven't slept since I got the news. But I needed to call in because I feel that what you just said is actually really on point. I think that Donald Trump, I'm not a Trump supporter.
Sure.
I voted for Kamala Harris, but I feel like I understand why Trump won, and I think that it's almost this unleashing that he gives, this cathartic unleashing that he allows the American population to just indulge in a sort of kayfabe mythos. And that's why they don't care that he's a criminal and he's a rapist and he's a liar, because it's almost like they're watching professional wrestling and he's a character and they like to see him kick ass, and they like to see him kick especially the asses of people like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and all of these people that they seem to be the epitome of democratic norms and ideals, but they daily just prove over and over that they will defy your expectations of that. They will send billions of dollars overseas to, unleash unimaginable destruction on other people's lives, and at the same time come back and campaign on joy and hope and change, and not promise any of it, and not prove that they will ever do any of it, not give you any reason to believe that they'll follow
It's enough
through.
to make the promise. It's enough to make the promise. So why would you trust them over another bloke making similar promises with just as little foundation for them, and that way you get to ignore his backstory? You pick up another fascinating point about Trump. I usually, and it was, of course, his former national security advisor who disowned him and called him a fascist. But normally these people have imperial ambition, don't they? Normally that strong man is someone that they think is going to go out there and conquer other territories or go out there and conquer enemies. Trump's appeal, as you rightly remind us, and as a couple of other callers have done as well, is built largely on the idea of America becoming more insular, building not just a wall between America and Mexico, but arguably a wall between America and NATO, a wall between America and the rest of the world. And that's another
100%.
way. Yeah.
100%, because they're like, the immediacy of their lives is just, why are my tax dollars going to bombing children in Gaza? It's like that. There's a cognitive disconnect. And so if it's okay, we need more border security, or Trump says that there were no wars under him, even if it's completely not true, it doesn't matter, because the people that are, like you're saying, they're supposed to represent the democratic norms. It's so much more insidious, and it's so much harder for your mind to wrap around if a friend is the one that is, I guess,
go on,
leading to genocide. If your friend is the one that
how much of Trump's support? How much of Trump's support, though? And I saw this debate unfolding in various places, but mostly Trump is perceived as being very good news for Benjamin Netanyahu. So, I pick up on some of the stuff you say, more so with regard to Ukraine. I don't know how much of Trump's support would come from people who were upset about Biden and Harris's support for Israel. Or maybe
I think what they're upset about is just the being lied to. They don't trust that Biden is the good guy and is doing what he's doing with Benjamin Netanyahu in Gaza. And with Trump, he says he's the no-war guy. And even if he is best friends with all these strong men... He's also
said he'd let America finish the job. He'd let Vladimir Putin finish the job. So...
in their mind, they think like, okay, then it'll be over.
Yeah.
It'll be over. The war will be over. So then no more wars. They don't care if what that means is nuclear catastrophe. It's an end to it, at least. Whereas, what does Kamala say? There will never be an end to our support. Like, all she will double down and quadruple down on is, we are forging forth. We are going with force. We want to be the most lethal we want to have the most lethal military in the world. Like, these are our democratic norms. People are over it. They are done with it. They would rather burn it down.
And so that's on the upholders of the democratic or the beneficiaries of the system. If a significant part of the population can't see the value in these liberal democratic norms, then it's the fault of the people who should have been upholding them and championing them. It is not enough to just not be him. You had to offer
James,
something.
if you turned around and stabbed me in the back, it would hurt my feelings a lot more than if Trump did, because I would expect him to do it. From you, it would hurt. That is what America is going through. We're heartbroken. And the people living in the South that are gung-ho for Trump, like, they're just they're having a schadenfreude frenzy. And honestly, they've earned it. And the Democrats, they've earned this loss. They have earned, and I'm sorry, they deserve this loss.
It's a strong word. They certainly are architects of their own downfall. Hard to argue with the idea that they got their comeuppance, they got what was coming. Julie, thank you. I'm late for the news, but before you go, I promise I will never stab you in the back, or indeed the front, or even the side. I can make that promise with absolute confidence. And quickly, this from Emma on that question of the traditional, quote, strongman, end quotes, although I still can't believe Trump gets put into that category. But look at some of the comic art that people put together of him, some of the bodies onto which they stick his head to make memes. The current enemy is perceived globalism. This sort of starts with people like Alex Jones and InfoWars. So it's a logical progression for the next strongman to be just anti-anything, anti the kind of boo sucks to you approach to politics. So Trump is anti it. What? Anti what? Don't know. Don't care. He's definitely anti it. 11:33 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
7 minutes after 11. Wasting my breath, chapter 343 this morning. If you are critiquing and expressing unhappiness about a democratic result, you are not undemocratic or anti-democracy. If you try to overturn one using violence or encouraging your supporters to use violence, then you are literally and categorically anti-democracy. So the idea that, there's something undemocratic or anti-democratic about not welcoming a result as opposed to trying to overturn it, but the bloke who tried to overturn it is the one who is... I shouldn't laugh, but... Well, actually, that's quite a good moment in which to apologise for the tone of today's programme, which some of you have picked up on being quite upbeat. This is my job. I talk about this stuff for a living. And the line that became almost tattooed across my consciousness in 2016, good for business, bad for the soul, means that I wake up on a morning like today and feel the bleakness that you feel. But by about 8:30, 9 o'clock, I can't wait to get on air and talk about it. It's a weird situation in which to find yourself. God knows what I would have been like as a war correspondent or a foreign correspondent, because then the stuff that you do for a living involves even more horrible events than the ones that we're describing. But that is possibly why I can still find the funny in the idea that Donald Trump supporters are, what's the word I'm looking for? So I'd say cultified, that you think that accepting and critiquing an election result, looking for reasons why a result has gone a certain way while expressing disappointment that it has, that's the anti-democratic position. But the guy that wanted to get his own vice president murdered, overthrow a democratic result and steal the presidency, yeah, he's the real Democrat here. He's the real fan of democracy. It's another mark of how mad everything is. It's another mark of how subverted liberal democratic norms are. And what do we do with that? You've got that other question, which is, of course, what is the worst that could happen? But it may be a little bit early to ask that. In some ways, J.D. Vance might be the worst that could happen. I don't know. There's a fascinating exchange between Dominic Sambrook and, was it Rory Stewart? Anthony Scaramucci on the question of whether or not Donald Trump is a fascist. Scaramucci, of course, has worked for him, thinks that he is. Dominic Sambrook is an esteemed historian, thinks that he isn't, precisely because of that point we just made about expansionist ambition. A fascist normally needs to conquer other territories in order to prove his status. I wonder whether Emma is actually a more acute observer of the human circus than Dominic Sandbrook on this one, when they talked about, in that message, talked about a new enemy. Donald Trump is going to conquer enemies. They're just not traditional enemies, as in sovereign states or other countries or armies. He's going to conquer woke. He's going to conquer globalism. He's going to. That is a PhD thesis waiting to be written. I'll let someone else write it. Possibly Arthur in Cheltenham, who is one of those people whose surname pops up on the screen because he has been booked as a guest on other programmes, but has had the grace and decency to ring mine as an ordinary punter. So I can tell you that Arthur Snell is a former diplomat, a rather brilliant writer across all manner of genres, and calling in from Cheltenham. Arthur, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, hi, James. I was thinking about this thing of the liberal democratic norms, and obviously Trump, rips them up, and that's his style. But actually, his behaviour makes others do that as well. And a small example of that is the way that everyone was congratulating him before actually the win was official. Now, that's very unusual, and basically is seen as sort of very undiplomatic.
Oh, really? But you wait for the full.
You'd wait for a formal result, because basically what you're sort of saying is I'm taking a call on the U.S. internal election. And clearly it's quite disrespectful to the current president, who is still Joe Biden until January.
Yes.
And it's quite disrespectful to Kamala Harris. But clearly nobody wants to risk being the last person to congratulate Trump. So they're all falling over each other to send out these letters of congratulation, which I thought was quite interesting.
That's very interesting. I think that possibly is what Paul Krugman, or not specifically, but it's the kind of big picture that he's alluding to when he talks about the media and presumably politics by association sort of capitulating in advance, as it were.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think because another angle on this is going to be what Trump does, I think, with Ukraine and European security. Because I've already heard in the last few weeks, in the run-up, when people were speculating as to whether Trump would win, people sort of saying, oh, it wouldn't be as bad as you think, and we'll find ways to work with Trump. And so, in a way, what we're doing is we're preparing to betray the Ukrainians so that we're still aligned with America, rather than actually doing what we should do, which is recognize that, our future and our security lies with securing Ukraine.
With resisting Putin. I know that's largely the same thing, but given your background, I'd ask you about that. Does this cast Brexit into an even colder light than it was already in, given that the European Union will probably not go down the path, or maybe you think it will, but I suspect that the European Union will consolidate support for Ukraine?
Totally. And I think, the issue now is whether or not they can do enough quick enough. And I think, as it happened, I was in Ukraine just a few weeks ago, I think the real fear is that Europe just doesn't have the wherewithal to churn out the weapons and the stuff, particularly artillery shells. And it's shameful. Our economies are 10 times the size of Russia's, but actually the Russians, partly with help from North Korea and so on, but actually mostly from their own productivity, are doing a better job of supplying their own forces.
What's the other path then, Arthur? Because I know that there's an interesting contrast to be drawn between Sadiq Khan's response to Trump's victory and Keir Starmer's, but of course they have very different jobs. And the timetabling of Starmer's congratulation notwithstanding, that's an interesting point that you've already made. But does he have any choice but to welcome the new leader of the free world and to quotes, look forward, end quotes, to cooperation? My naive undergraduate soul would quite like a major world leader to stand up and describe Donald Trump as exactly what he is and speak perhaps in the language that David Lammy has deployed historically. But as Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, they can't really, can they?
No, I think you're right. I felt that some of the language was a bit sort of overly toady-ish.
Okay.
He could have talked about shared values and then listed some and sort of, dare Donald Trump to disagree.
Yes.
But ultimately, I think,
yes,
it's a norm. And the thing about Trump, he's so clearly a complete kind of psychopath of vanity. But I think anything less than kind of full-throated praise, is not enough for him. And he's very vindictive.
And in the context of keeping him happy, and I guess a central point of what you're telling is that keeping him happy and keeping America happy are for the next 5 years, next 4.5 years, more or less exactly the same thing. What would you fear most, if it's not too soon to ask you that question, particularly given that we have a Labour government? We haven't happily got sort of Trump cheerleaders in Downing Street at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, my biggest fear is actually the thing about NATO, because I don't think Trump will leave NATO in a formal way. But actually, he doesn't need to, because he's already made it very clear he doesn't really care about other countries. He's not going to lift a finger to defend Latvia or Taiwan or, you know, any other country, really, unless he sees some direct interest. So in a way, the thing about NATO is it works because people believe it works. And it's the assumed deterrence that makes NATO so powerful and has been so successful. And I think that's already finished. You know, that's the fact that Trump has now won means that NATO is now a dysfunctional alliance.
Holy moly. Arthur's book, How Britain Broke the World, was published in 2022 and is a helpful guide to some of the issues that we've touched upon and many more besides. Arthur Snell, thank you. The time is 11:46. The question possibly is a little bit premature, as in what is the worst that could happen. Somebody cleverer than me is going to write an article in the next couple of months about what happens if J.D. Vance ends up president by inheritance. In the event of something happening to Donald Trump, that J.D. Vance automatically steps up to the big job, and his closeness to some of the sinister figures at the top of the American wealth ladder is very well documented. I mean, Trump, for his myriad failings, is, I think, so sort of rogue and maverick that you can't describe him as being in anyone's pocket. And if he is in someone's pocket today, it could be in someone else's pocket tomorrow. J.D. Vance is a different proposition entirely. But again, I think it's probably a little bit early to go down that road. So what I will do after this, I'll play you at least one clip, possibly two. We found the clip that Chris in Brighton referred to about the difference between letting Donald Trump be headmaster of your children's school, which most people would balk at, and letting him be president. That's a great way into a subject. I should have done that as a phone-in last week. I may do it again. What is the difference? So why wouldn't you want him to be president of your children, to be headmaster of your children's school, but you are comfortable with him being president? It's weird, isn't it? And the other one is the journey that Joe Rogan has been on. I'm a bit of a late arriver at the Joe Rogan party, and I'm not a particularly enthusiastic party goer. I just got so much content out there. You can only follow so much. And when you talk about stuff for a living, listening to other people talk about stuff for a living is arguably a little bit less attractive than it would be if you had a normal life or a normal job. But the question of how someone like that could go on the journey that he's been on is one that the Democrats have signally failed to answer.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:51 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This is a clip because I thought Chris in Brighton was such an interesting contributor. Again, I know I say it most days, not every day. I hope you keep a note of the days that I don't say it, and then everyone who rang in that day can go home and do 100 lines. But most days, or many days, particularly when the news is big, I thank my lucky stars, count my blessings for the quality of contributors that we have now. It's why I have to keep occasionally referring to Idiot's Corner, just to keep my feet on the ground. Otherwise, it becomes like Plato's Symposium, this programme, apart from my pitiful contributions. But Chris in Brighton's familiarity and facility with American political coverage was remarkable. So for him to single out a moment from the last few weeks that resonated particularly with him seemed to me to be something worth revisiting. And it is on the Bill Maher programme. I'm never quite sure how to pronounce that name, but it's spelled Maher. And it is an American political commentator described as a libertarian, which sometimes has me running for the hills. But he was communications director for the Jeb Bush presidential campaign in 2016. Remember when everyone thought that Jeb Bush's path to the White House was more or less obstacle-free? But he also became an early and prominent critic of Donald Trump from within the Republican Party. And I think Chris was right. This is worth listening to.
These are the stupidest smart people in the world. And and it's only in the context of politics where somebody as smart as Ben Shapiro would take a risk such as this on Donald Trump, right? In their personal lives, they would never put their kids in a school where somebody like Donald Trump was the principal of the school. They would never do that, right? If there were two options and there was like a normal center-left kind of woke liberal running one school, and there was an insane madman sundowning running the other school, saying random all the time, they would always go in the woke liberal school every time. All these people, they're only doing this in the context of politics. It is an unbelievable risk. And the Wall Street Journal this morning, if you don't mind, I pulled this one up. These are supposed to be the intelligent conservatives. This was their editorial today. Mr. Trump was too undisciplined and his attention span too short to stay on message, much less stage a coup. In supporting Trump, the Wall Street Journal's editorial position is he's too stupid to coup, so we're going to roll with it. That is insane. He's going to be older than Biden. At the end, he's going to be older than Biden. We're going to have this elderly man with only crazy people around him in charge at age 82. Who would take this risk? No matter, even if you did agree with the policies or whatever, it is a ludicrous risk to take, and all of these supposedly smart people have lost their mind to go along with it.
That's really good, isn't it? Maybe I should watch more of these shows. I like that. I also quite like the idea of a mainstream audience talk show, getting stuck in routinely to politics in quite a light-hearted and irreverent fashion. It couldn't happen here, could it? Could it? It's coming up to 11:55. Quick word with Rory and Cobham, and then I think it's time to redirect the spotlight back to Blighty and prepare for the first PMQs that will feature Kemi Badenoch as leader of the opposition. As I mentioned earlier, fears that she had no sense of humour were roundly dispatched yesterday when she made Mark Francois a shadow minister. Rory's in Cobham. Rory, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
I just wanted to call up just to try and enlighten you. You keep kind of alluding to the fact that voting for Trump is voting for rape.
No,
is that
no. A man found by a court to have raped a woman.
A civil court in a highly democratic area. But apart from that, you're assuming that the people
convicted of multiple felonies.
You're assuming that
disowned by his former vice president, disowned by his national security advisor, called a fascist by his former chief of staff, and described by his former military chief as the most dangerous person ever. We are very short of time, so if you could do it quickly, I'd be very grateful.
If you let me speak. So you're assuming that these people have this information, James, but the people voting for Trump probably don't have this information. They're not aware of it.
How can they not be aware of January the 6th?
Because some of these people don't have passports, James. In Odessa, Texas, do you think those people have left the state? All they care about is the price of petrol.
No, but if they know Donald Trump exists, if they know the result of the last election, they know that Donald Trump tried to overturn it, and they probably know that he lied about it. They saw the scenes of January the 6th. So it doesn't matter what the list is, Rory. You just pick one thing on it that you would previously have taken to be a deal breaker. And you're right to suggest that one circumstance in which it... Hang on, just let me get this out before you tell me why I'm wrong. One circumstance in which it wouldn't be a deal breaker would be that you didn't know about it. But I think if you had to pick one thing that they definitely know about, it would be January the 6th. Or the grabbing women by the vagina.
Okay, but these people are working 12-hour shifts. They haven't got time to read The Guardian while having their cinnamon spice lattes.
But that just makes you sound silly. You think only The Guardian reported on the January the 6th attempted coup? Only The Guardian and people who drink cinnamon... What was it? Say it again.
A cinnamon spice latte.
Oh, yeah, that's very funny. Only people who drink coffees like that are aware of the long charge sheets against Donald Trump, because there's one mystery you have to solve for me.
Of this election, are they, James?
He talks about these things all the time, so they don't listen to Donald Trump either.
But these people are working 12-hour days, James.
Well, you keep saying that, but Donald Trump talks about these things all the time. Are you telling me that the average Donald Trump voter is unaware of Donald Trump or the things that he says?
Some of the things that he's been accused of.
No. He talks about these accusations all the time. He talks about the 2020 election all the time. So for your theory to work, what was it? Spiced cinnamon lattes?
Exactly.
Yeah, spiced cinnamon lattes notwithstanding, for your theory to work, the people that you're patronising would have to be unaware of what Donald Trump talks about more than anything else.
So this is the crux of the problem. I'm not patronising them. You are.
You just said that they're too busy to know anything. They're too busy to know anything, and the only people that follow the news drink spiced cinnamon lattes. It is coming. What is a spiced cinnamon? What's the spice if it's not the cinnamon, Rory?
Hello?
Yeah, what's the spice? Cinnamon is a spice, so what's the other spice?
I don't know. I don't drink them, James. Enlighten me.
I've never heard of it before.
Oh, right. Okay.
Tell me why it's funny.
Off, or can I retort?
No. Tell me why it's funny before you go.
What being funny?
Referring to a coffee in the context of this conversation.
You're trying to drag me down a road that...
No, I just want you to tell... Mate, I didn't get the joke. It's all on me. Why is it funny?
Okay. So do you want to speak about the actual problem at hand, or...
I've told you what I want to speak about. I want you to explain to me this joke I didn't get, because it's always embarrassing when you don't get a joke. Why is it funny?
Have you kept in touch with how the markets are reacting?
Why is it funny to talk about a certain brand of coffee or a certain flavour? Is it a brand? Is it a flavour? Is it a variety? Why is it funny?
You're going to talk over me.
It's 11:58, time for PMQs. We got one in the end. Have you ever had a spiced cinnamon latte?
Come on, dude, you must have had a pumpkin spice latte. You must have at least heard of a pumpkin
spice
yes.
latte?
Starbucks.
Every day's a school day. What on earth is going to happen in PMQs?
Keir Starmer doesn't know, I don't think, and neither do we. I was just speaking to someone who... so Keir Starmer was just a few hours before the US election speaking at the press gallery last night to journalists in the House of Commons. And apparently he told somebody how nervous he was about the prospect of facing Kemi Badenoch because he doesn't know what her style is, he doesn't know what she's going to go on.
This is not necessarily a compliment.
Yeah, well, but you know what? He probably should have prepared a bit more because she's been the favourite to win this Tory leadership crown for a long, long time. So I do think it's hard to pinpoint it down exactly what her style's going to be, exactly where she's going to go. If I were her, I think I want to keep the focus off the US election for the mainly and think about the budget because I think that's where she feel that she's on stronger ground.
Okay.
Labour's budget, farmers. VAT on private schools, looking for some clear sort of what she might think is blue water between the two.
Farmers will be big.
Yeah, I think so. I think they've felt so nervous about it that they've met the NFU this week. The Environment Secretary and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury have held meetings with the NFU. I think that is something that they feel that is unfair. They feel they could potentially push Rachel Reeves into changing. And also for Kemi Badenoch, it's her first opportunity to actually sort of dig the boot in about the last sort of first 100 days of this Labour government, what she sees is wrong and where she sees the Tory party is able to try and combat that.
It's 12 noon and a normal business in the House of Commons, albeit that the political landscape is huge today. So we will cross as soon as Kemi Badenoch gets to her feet to take PMQs. I'm going to choose my words carefully now, because you know Kemi Badenoch a lot better than I do. You've followed her career a lot more closely than I have. There has been one report of a farmer taking his own life prior to the budget announcement, and his son has told the Daily Telegraph and other media outlets that he believes it was linked to his father's fears about what might be in the budget, although I stress again that the tragedy occurred before the budget was announced. Some politicians would go there, I think, in the context of PMQs. Do you think Kemi Badenoch could be one of those politicians?
I haven't seen that report.
Have you not?
No.
Okay.
And I
think I've given you enough detail, but you don't have to answer.
You know what?
Question.
I don't think so. I think you might think that she would. I don't think so. I don't think she's going to go. I mean, people say that she is very punchy, that she's combative, that she speaks her mind. I think she'd much rather rely on an argument like, trying to make a specific point about why she feels this is bad rather than bring up something like that at her first PMQs. But equally, I've spoken to Tory MPs and to Tories who voted in this leadership contest for the last sort of week or so about why they think that Kemi Badenoch was picked. And they wanted to go with a risk. They wanted to take a big, bold risk with someone like Kemi Badenoch. And she is going to ruffle feathers. She is going to say things that are controversial. She's going to say things that a lot of people don't like. And if you're Keir Starmer, you're going to have her comments on maternity pay ready to go. You're going to have some of her most controversial things that she's already said. She is like Mama. You either love her or you hate her. She's got a lot of support in some wings of the Tory party. Obviously, on the Labour benches, they will have a lot of comments, and they've been briefing her against her all week and all of her shadow cabinet already. They will have a long list of all of these comments that all of the people in her shadow cabinet.
What could go wrong? What perhaps are her weaknesses in the context? I mean, we're unlikely to see these on display today, or certainly not all of the strengths and all of the weaknesses, but what could go wrong? What would people, whether they're critics or otherwise, be most fearful of?
Well, she quite, obviously you might think that Keir Starmer would go on something culture warsy and say that, you're someone that risks, stirring up division and stirring up hatred. I think she relishes that. I think she knows that argument. She's had 4 months of a Tory leadership argument where people have been making that argument to her again and again and again, day in, day out. You stir up hate. You're a culture war warrior. Is this all you've got? But is that again? I don't think she'll see that as a weakness. I think she'll have something to go back to that. I think what Keir Starmer will be looking to do is try and sort of dig something under her armour, sort of finding a button that he can push. I don't know what those are, to be honest, but obviously you do see her get, lose her cool sometimes. And is she going to have a moment at some point where Keir Starmer manages to make a lawyerly dig, where he sort of gets under that armour and pushes a button? I don't know what that is. I don't know what her sort of soft underbelly and where he goes. But obviously that's exactly the kind of tactic that I expect we'd see from him.
It's a huge step up, isn't it? For
it
her,
is,
career-wise. I mean, Cameron probably the last one who was coming from a similarly, although she's been in government and he hadn't.
She has, and she's been at the dispatch box day in, day out. She hasn't faced him in the same way that she's about to face him right now for the first time.
Let's find out.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for his almost warm welcome? And can I also echo the comments that he has made? It is an immense privilege and the honour of my life to lead the Conservative Party. And I look forward to joining him at the Cenotaph this Remembrance Sunday. As leader of His Majesty's opposition, I will be taking a different approach to the last opposition by being a constructive opposition. And so I would like to start by congratulating President-elect Trump on his impressive victory this morning. The Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary met him in September. Did the Foreign Secretary take that opportunity to apologise for making derogatory and scatological references, including, and I quote, Trump is not only a woman-hating, neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, he is also a profound threat to the international order. And if he did not apologise, will the Prime Minister do so now on his behalf?
Mr. Speaker, there will be many issues on which the Leader of the Opposition and I disagree, but there will be issues that do unite this House on national security and Ukraine, and I do look forward to working closely with her on that, and I will provide her with the information that she needs to discharge her duties. That's the right thing for the country, and it's far more important than party politics. And the Foreign Secretary and I did meet President-elect Trump just a few weeks ago for dinner for about a couple of hours, and we discussed a number of issues of global significance. It was a very constructive exercise.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister did not distance himself from the remarks made by the Foreign Secretary, and I'm very sure that President Trump will soon be calling to thank him for sending all of those North London Labour activists to campaign for his opponent. Given that most of his cabinet signed a motion to ban President Trump from addressing Parliament, will the Prime Minister show that he and his government can be more than student politicians by asking the Speaker to extend? Can they show that they can be more than student politicians?
Order. Mr. Perkins, I don't need to anymore. Your voice curries, it's like mine, too loud.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister show that he and his government can be more than student politicians by asking you, Mr. Speaker, to extend an invitation to President Trump to address Parliament on his next visit?
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is giving a masterclass on student politics. Seriously, Mr. Speaker, we live in probably a more volatile world than we've lived in for many decades. It is absolutely crucial that we have a strong relationship, that strong special relationship forged in difficult circumstances between the US and the UK. We will continue to work, as we have done in the 4 months in government, on issues of security, our economy and global conflict.
Mr. Speaker, he does not answer the questions, just read the lines the officials have prepared for him. It doesn't sound like he wants to invite President-elect Trump to Parliament. He needs to look after the special relationship. The US is our single biggest trade partner. Given the risk of increased tariffs on UK exports, which threaten our manufacturing sector, will the Prime Minister commit now to continue the negotiations on our free trade agreement with the US, which the Biden administration cancelled when they came into office?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course we will discuss issues of our economy with the President-elect, as we already have done. Economy, security and global conflict are issues of real significance that ought to unite this House. But when it comes to the economy, what we've done with our budget is to fix the foundations after 14 years. Return to economic stability of the £23 million black hole. We've protected the pay slips of working people. We've done the single biggest investment in our country for a generation in the NHS, in schools and homes. We've given a pay rise to the 3 million lowest paid. Now, if she's opposed to that investment or the pay rise for working people, she's a straight talker as I understand it, perhaps she should say so.
Mr. Speaker, discuss, chat. He has no plans whatsoever. No plans whatsoever for building on the special relationship. He needs to realise that we in this country rely on our single biggest trade partner. President Trump is also right to argue that Europe needs to increase its defence spending. The last Conservative government committed to raising defence spending to 2.5% by 2030. Will the Prime Minister finally match this commitment?
Mr. Speaker, there is no more important duty than keeping the people of this country safe. And it was the Labour government that signed the NATO treaty in the first place, and we are strong supporters. We have a strategic defence review. We are committed to 2.5%. Well, I would remind the last time 2.5 was met was under the last Labour government. 14 years, and they never did it once. Last year, the NAO identified a £17 billion black hole in the MOD finances. The former Defence Secretary said the previous government hollowed out the armed forces, and the plan they put forward at the election was pure fantasy.
Mr. Speaker, he will not make that commitment. That is very clear. All that he is doing...
I'm going to hear the questions. If the people who don't want to hear it, they can leave now. Come on.
Mr. Speaker, he will not make that commitment, and yet the world is getting more dangerous. His Chancellor's budget did not even mention defence. The Chancellor's budget last week was a copy and paste of Bidenomics. It turns out that a high spending, high borrowing, high inflation approach is less popular than she may have thought. May I suggest he now urge her to change course, or is he determined to be a one-term leader?
Prime Minister. The one thing I learned as Leader of the Opposition is a good idea to listen to what the government is actually saying. I think she just said that defence wasn't mentioned in the budget. It was 7 days ago that it was absolutely clear and central to the budget, as was economic growth. We are fixing the foundations. We're giving a pay rise to millions of people. We're picking up the mess that they left, 22 billion, and a tax rise and a pay rise for working people. And I haven't heard yet her welcome that pay rise for the 3 million lowest paid workers. Does she now welcome it? Does she stick to her previous policy that it's excessive?
Mr. Speaker, I was the one who raised the minimum wage last year as Business Secretary. I have a strong record on this, but we need to make sure that we balance the books. His scripted lines are showing that he has not even listened to the budget himself. So I will try a different question. Perhaps he can give something that is unscripted to the people watching. Farmers across the United Kingdom... Mr. Speaker.
Order! I don't need any help. Can I just say, if somebody wants to leave, I'll be helping them do that. I'm going to hear the question, and I certainly want to hear the answer as well. So please, let's have some courtesy.
Mr. Speaker, we have heard him repeat the lines on the television, fixing the foundations and so on. But what does he say over and over again? But what does he say to farmers who are facing uncertainty about their futures as a result of the increased taxes announced by the Chancellor? I am very clear that we would reverse Labour's cruel family farms tax. What can he say now to reassure the farming community, who provide security for the whole nation?
Prime Minister.
I'm happy to help the Leader of the Opposition. If she's going to complain about scripted answers, it's probably best not to read that from a script. What I will say about farmers is this. I'm glad she's raised farmers, because the budget last week put £5 billion over the next 2 years into farming. That's the single biggest increase, unlike the £300 million, which was an underspend under the last government. And when it comes to inheritance, the vast majority of farmers will be unaffected, as she well knows, as they well know. But that budget was about fixing the foundations, fixing the whole $22 billion that they left, and investing in the future of our country, investing in our NHS, investing in our schools, our hospitals and our homes. And I'm proud that that's the investment work. And if they oppose it, they should go out there and tell their constituents they're against that investment in the future of our country. That's the difference. A Labour government taking us forward. They're stuck in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to hear Matthew Patrick.
Mr. Speaker, Emily left her ex, but the abuse did not stop. He stayed in their home, cancelled the mortgage contributions and destroyed her credit score. Now she cannot even take out a mobile phone contract. Surviving economic abuse and UK finance have made progress tackling this issue, but more has to be done. Will the Prime Minister and his government work with me to introduce new provisions so that we can restore the credit files for survivors of economic abuse like Emily?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this really important issue, because economic abuse has a devastating impact on victims, leaving them vulnerable and isolated. And we are committed to ending this national emergency and keeping women safe from domestic abuse, harassment and stalking. And Mr. Speaker, that includes 200,000 this year to the charity Surviving Economic Abuse, and HMRC have launched an online tool to help charities and businesses identify and respond to economic abuse. And I'll make sure he has a meeting with the relevant minister.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about Remembrance Sunday? We must always remember the brave British men and women who gave their lives for our country. And can I join him in welcoming the Conservative leader to her place? And can I congratulate her on becoming the first black leader of a UK-wide party, a major and historic achievement? Mr. Speaker, President-elect Trump praised Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and I quote, he called it genius. He also said he would encourage Russia to do whatever the hell they want to NATO allies. So what action is the Prime Minister taking to encourage a Trump presidency to change its mind? Because otherwise it's a huge threat to global security and to national security in the UK. Does he agree with me that the US will not oppose President Putin and support our brave Ukrainian allies? The UK must lead in Europe so that together we do.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud that in this House we are united on the question of Ukraine and clear about Russian aggression, and we will continue to do so. I've long taken the view that the only winner, if we are divided in this House, is Putin, and I'm not prepared to let that happen. Our relationship with the US is a strong relationship forged in very difficult circumstances historically. It remains as strong today as it was when it was first forged, and I look forward to working with President-elect Trump to ensure that relationship stays the special relationship.
Sir David.
I'm grateful for the Prime Minister's comments on Ukraine, but Donald Trump has also said that trade wars are good. He calls himself Tariff Man. People are really worried that Trump trade wars and tariff will damage our economy, damage businesses, and hit the cost of living here in the UK. So, given this, does the Prime Minister recognise that it's more urgent than ever that we support our British economy by getting rid of the damaging trade barriers with Europe put in place by the Conservatives?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as you will know, we've put the economy centrepiece to our budget, and we will do everything that we need to do to ensure our economy grows, and that's measured in living standards going up for working people across the country. Thank you.
Alex Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are so many families across Aldershot and Farnborough.
So there it is, Kemi Badenoch's debut as leader of the opposition, the bones of which we will pick over with Natasha Clark after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 12 is the time. So there it is. I want to stress, before I read out any of the comments that have come into the programme, that last week it was a very warm and friendly space, my inbox, during PMQs. There was a lot of comment about the maturity of, it wasn't last week, was it? It was the week before. Anyway, Rishi Sunak's last outing as leader of the opposition. And I mention that because it proves that the people who message me at between 12 o'clock and 20 past on a Wednesday when PMQs is underway are, as ever, a multiplicity of perspectives. I found one nice comment about Kemi Badenoch so far in my inbox, and that was from Michael, who said, well, I don't know why he said I hate to say it, but Badenoch did a good job, clear voice and some good points made, 8 out of 10 for me. Before I read you some of the other comments that have come in since 12 o'clock, let's turn to LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark. Can we begin with the defence? Two things occurred to me listening to that. Kemi Badenoch accused Keir Starmer of not knowing what was in Rachel Reeves's budget. And then unless I've lost the plot completely, brackets again, brackets, unless I've lost the plot completely, she missed the bit in the budget when Rachel Reeves did talk about defence.
Yeah, I think she missed the bit where she announced another £2.9 billion worth of cash for defence and talked about the defence review that we know is coming in a couple of months' time. So maybe she hasn't read the budget as forensically as she should. But it's a bit bold to go in on your first PMQs with such a take, to accuse him of being wrong on this and not mentioning something. It feels a bit like an oversight. It feels a bit sloppy. She made some good points, but I think she made them really poorly. I think that it's fair enough if she wanted to go on Keir Starmer and his top team's comments about Donald Trump, about what they've said in the past. That's completely fair political capital to go on. Keir Starmer, I think, reacted incredibly well to that.
That was statesman-like. That was statesman versus undergraduate. I mean, I'm not suggesting for a minute that this will still be true 6 months from now, but if I was advising Kemi Badenoch, I'd be certain of two things. Number one, she's going to completely ignore me because she doesn't take advice from anybody. And number two, she really needs to work out how she's going to deal with a statesman on the other side of the dispatch box as opposed to a sort of student union rival.
I totally agree with you on student union politics. That's exactly how she came across to me as well. And, talking about scripted remarks, Prime Minister's questions is half scripted remarks.
And she read some of her own out
she read her own,
which is just bizarre.
It is. I don't think that went down too well. I'm still just baffled that she went on Donald Trump. He is not popular in the United Kingdom. 18% of people, according to a poll from a couple of weeks ago, wanted Trump to win. Why on earth? I'm not quite sure you would go in like that. I think
they're all listening to my show today. But I would suggest that she's really at her most confident when she's doing culture wars. So in some ways, this was an open goal, culture war-wise, with which to go after Starmer, but it was wrong for a whole heap of other reasons, not least that Starmer, if he wanted to get engaged in the student union politics, could turn around and say, well, my top team have spoken very negatively about Donald Trump, but not as negatively as Donald Trump's top team. So I'm not quite sure what point it is that the leader of the opposition is making.
Yeah, and I think she was much stronger as she went on to the budget talk, when she was talking about farmers, when she was talking about branding it Labour's family farming tax. And that felt a little bit more on safer ground for her, and I felt like she sort of started to pull it back. But, you know, I totally agree with Ed Davey for once from Prime Minister's Questions, him going on two things which I think were really, really well-made points about Russia and what the impact of Donald Trump coming back to the White House means for Ukraine, means for that war there. And his comments about trade wars, his comments about tariffs, bringing it back to the cost of living. These are things that I think will resonate with people. I don't think people are going to potentially remember those comments that David Lammy made about Trump being a neo-Nazi, a sociopath, all of that. I could say it's political capital that she's welcome to make. I think she is fair to make them. I don't think she made them in the strongest way.
No, and I repeat again, if his own national security advisor, former vice president, chief of staff in the White House and military chiefs kind of agree with Lammy's analysis, then there's not going to be a lot of road with which for Kemi Badenoch to revisit it. Unless, of course, she's doing what Robert Jenrick did during the leadership election and thinking first of the people that lean towards reform as opposed to people that she needs to tempt back into the Tory fold.
Well, that's potentially why she's done this and why she's gone on this today. And of course, we know that Nigel Farage is going to be a real thorn in Keir Starmer's side from now on because of the relationship. Yeah, because of the relationship that he already has with Donald Trump and with Donald Trump's top team. So that's going to be really difficult for, I think, Keir Starmer to navigate. I think, Kemi Badenoch will be right to anticipate where that's going. But it didn't feel like today was the day to sort of talk about this. And it didn't feel quite right for her sort of to go in. And I think his response saying, look, today's a day which we're going to work together on a range of issues. Keir Starmer is ever the pragmatist, ever the sort of,
Well, that's a really interesting point. It's also just while we're on the culture war stuff, you could quote Boris Johnson talking about Donald Trump to almost as much effect as you could quote David Lammy. But
and anyone on half the Conservative Party privately will, and many publicly will say the same thing about Donald Trump.
So an odd gambit, but it highlights, and I don't know that I agree with you much about Farage having a particular role to play, because you can be Donald Trump's sworn enemy on a Monday, as Elon Musk was, and his best friend by Friday. So that perhaps explains why the warm words have been issued, as Arthur Snell suggested to us a little bit earlier, perhaps a little prematurely, certainly a little earlier than convention. But this is the interesting thing, because Starmer and his team are in charge of navigating Trump's caprices, whether it's tariffs or trade wars. A few people pointing out to me that it's a bit rich of Badenoch to talk about trade deals when she's demonstrated her failure to understand the difference between a trade deal and a meaningless memo of understanding. But again, we can park that for another day. Starmer's this is a bit of a nightmare to be dealing with a rat in a sack. But a rat in a sack who has quite a lot of influence and power over your own country. I mean, America is not our biggest trade partner. That's the European Union. Again, something else I think Badenoch got wrong, unless she's splitting the European Union.
Not sure she said the word country. We're not sure she said the word trade bloc.
But Starmer can't, and nor can Lammy, come out and say what they really think about this man, because they have to do business with him.
That's called being in government. That's just,
isn't it?
You've got to suck it up and realise that this is the way to do grown-up politics.
But they do.
Yeah, exactly. And, I don't think anybody really grudges that from Keir Starmer and his team. And actually, speaking to people in Downing Street, speaking to people in the Foreign Office over the last sort of few weeks, and many people weren't quite ready for the idea of a Trump victory, but it was there in the back of people's minds that this could happen. But with Donald Trump, there's a lot of talk, but does he walk the walk? And they're not quite sure that he's going to go as far on NATO as he says, is going to be pushing for peace deal in Ukraine, is going to be quite as bad as they think. Look. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying that 4 years of Donald Trump didn't cause some chaos. Of course it did. But did Donald Trump do all of the things that he says he's going to do in an election campaign? Donald Trump campaigning is totally different to Donald Trump in office.
In office, except for the bits that Vladimir Putin wants. I think we shall.
Yeah, and that's going to be a really dangerous thing to watch for.
The most intelligent. Well, look, a quick roundup of messages that have come in, and if you want to balance it, then you've got time to do so. 84850 is the number you need to leaven this particular feast. So Shan kicks things off. This is just starting from roughly when Kemi Badenoch got to her feet. Real-time commentary from LBC listeners. This isn't the slam dunk she thinks it is. Wow, she's really sucking up to Trump. Is Kemi Badenoch the new leader of the opposition or Trump's ambassador to the UK? Liam is my favourite so far. She's making a real muck mess of this.
Like that a lot.
He literally just said he would make that defence commitment. Ben noticed that. Kemi didn't. Bloody hell, writes Becky. Is she okay? Did someone upset her this morning? That's her default position, I think. Is she really the best the Tories could find? Badenoch is a total, can I say that word? weapon. I think I can. I have now. Graceless, charmless, no sense of irony. Badenoch reading scripted questions about scripted answers. Risible hypocrisy. Interesting that Kemi Badenoch should ask questions about trade deals. There is evidence that she does not know the difference between trade deals and memorandums of understanding. Keith in Poland there, a man after my own heart. I feel like I've just watched one of those cartoons where one character holds the head of the opponent and the opponent just punches thin air. Badenoch couldn't land a single line on Starmer. He literally just did make a commitment to 2.5% defence spending. Hate to say Badenoch did a good job. Clear voice and some good points made for me. What an absolute embarrassment. Anyone watching outside the UK will think we are a joke after Badenoch's performance. I've got to stop now because there's so many. But we leave it with this one. Didn't the Tories say that they voted for Badenoch because she would be good at PMQs? Does this mean that we're about to have another Tory leadership race soon?
Please, no. We've had a 5-month one. I'm just really not ready for that anytime soon. But look, she was still smiling when the cameras cut away for her. She's going to feel that went well.
Bless her. Quick word on how hard it is to get rid of her now, which is considerably harder than it was last week. Considerably harder. 15% of the Tory party were previously needed to submit a letter of no confidence. Now it's going to be a third of the party. And obviously that's because of the changing makeup of the Conservative Party. They're a much smaller organisation than before. But it does mean that if and when Kemi Badenoch gets into trouble, if and when they start to see that she's not winning those by-elections, Conservative seats, and really making inroads in the polls, if that doesn't happen, they're going to find it a lot harder to get rid of her than they did before. It is 12:31. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
34 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I don't know. I'm going to suggest you bookmark this. I said that there was not much praise of Kemi Badenoch's debut at PMQs to leaven all the criticism that poured into my inbox while she was talking. But one of my favourite observers of the human condition is indeed singing from a slightly different hymn sheet from the massive bulk of the contributions that I read out. This is, and I think you should bookmark this. Just let's wait and see, okay? She's got the rhythm down. She's calm. She's hit the right tone. Starmer sounds blustery in comparison. She went for culture wars immediately, but in a more subtle fashion to lead up to the farmer story. She's using media quotable sound bites. That one-term leader will be picked up on. Don't listen to the words. Listen to the noise and compose the tweets and hashtags afterwards. That was a textbook online rabble-rouser in action. Not good as in desirable or moral, but good as in effective. You forget they're alternative facts. You're still looking for truth in politics. Yep, guilty as charged. But the average media consumer doesn't know who those former chiefs of staff might be. That's all the former very, very senior close allies of Donald Trump who've condemned him. They do know what they see on Twitter, and the David Lammy comments are all over the sphere. So a suggestion that perhaps Kemi Badenoch knew exactly what she was doing. She made the US trading comment on purpose. That whole section was specifically courting the new president. Her whole speech was measured internet theatre, I promise you. Wow. So that is very much in contrast to the consensus on what Kemi Badenoch said, performed. But I told you to bookmark it because it certainly gave me pause for thought during the news bulletin there. 12:36 at the time. Speaking of the news, inevitably attention has been focused almost entirely on Washington, D.C. overnight, and indeed on America in general, which may have come as something of a relief for Benjamin Netanyahu, who, I mean, we've already spoken to Noga Tarnopolsky once this week, and that was only on Monday, but it's fair to say that events have moved on a pace even since then. And Noga joins me live from Jerusalem, where we should probably begin with the sacking of the Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, the whys and the wherefores of that, if you would, Noga.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hello.
Well, there are a number of reasons for this sacking. The Defence Minister and the Prime Minister have not gotten along since the start of the war. Yoav Gallant is a retired general. He is very well connected to the army. He has managed to straddle his job as a government minister and as the titular head of the army quite well in a very, very difficult year. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, as we all know, is on trial for corruption charges. And because he's on trial, he's not allowed to serve as a minister. He's allowed to be elected as party head to be prime minister, ironically. Wow. So what's happening now is that Netanyahu chose, as he's being engulfed by two new massive espionage security scandals, and he's losing one by one his closest aides in his office. And as the U.S. elections were underway, he chose to fire Yoav Gallant and replace him with a weak figurehead who has zero military experience, the former foreign minister. And the understanding here in Israel is that this is Netanyahu's way of trying to take over for himself the defense ministry, but not break the law.
For people who aren't fully across the espionage allegations that you refer to, if we were to boil them down to brass tacks, the allegation is that people extremely close to Netanyahu, and I'll say no more than that, engaged in a process of manipulation and misinformation that was designed to endanger the hostages and prolong the war, to do the polar opposite, in other words, of what Netanyahu and his supporters claimed was their top priority pretty much from October the 7th onwards.
There's that, and what has been added to that since then is, first of all, that material that was manipulated was stolen from IDF, from Israel Defense Forces military intel. And the other aspect that has just emerged yesterday, blew out into the open, is that Netanyahu's top aides, different aides, are accused of tampering with the protocols of the war cabinet from day one.
I mean, that's extraordinary, even by the standards of Israeli politics over the last few years.
It's unprecedented. It is absolutely extraordinary. And during wartime, these are considered espionage cases. That's what the judges wrote on the gag order.
So what happens now?
I wish I knew what to tell you. There were significant but not overwhelming protests last night. I have the sense that the Israeli public may simply at this point feel defeated.
Yeah, battered.
Yeah.
To the point of nothing we do matters, and every time we think we've reached the bottom, up pops another depth to plumb.
Exactly that. And the opposition that held this big, all four leaders of different opposition parties held a press conference today. But there is a feeling that even they're completely ineffectual. There's also the feeling that members of Netanyahu's party who have stuck by him through thick and thin are a little bit frightened. There have been a significant amount of leaks from his cabinet, from members of his party, from people who, in the absence of a real functional defense minister mid-war, are starting to feel a little scared.
I saw that the Hostage Families Forum had also issued a statement expressing deep concern over how this sacking could affect the fate of the remaining hostages still in Gaza. You marry all of these things together, and it becomes increasingly hard to cling on to the belief or to cling on to the conviction that Benjamin Netanyahu cared or cares about them at all.
Well, that's the formal statement that you're quoting that was kind of polite. There have been absolutely heart-rending scenes. Einav Tsengaukar, the mother of a hostage called Matan Tsengaukar, really screaming out last night in Tel Aviv that the government is just sent her son to be executed. This morning, a gentleman called Dani El-Garat, whose brother is a hostage, simply stated as a fact that he believes his brother has been killed as a hostage. So there have been really, really terrible developments in terms of the families of the hostages.
You were at the protest last night. What you might call scandal fatigue or outrage fatigue notwithstanding. I think that's what you were alluding to when you talked of them being tired. What were they saying? What was the sort of focus? What were the central points of complaint?
At the Jerusalem protest is always very much focused against Netanyahu. It has less of a hostage family element than the one in Tel Aviv does. And yesterday there were signs that read, Netanyahu's a traitor, which has also been basically said now by the leader of the...
Oh, I think we've lost the line at the crucial moment, as being basically said also by I presume by the leader of the opposition, but don't take that as read without double checking or clarifying with Noga. We'll try and get her back. And of course, one element of this that continues to be overlooked in this country is that the means by which the people accused of treason and espionage in Israel managed to get their misinformation into the Israeli media was via the Jewish Chronicle in this country. A situation which would be shocking in any circumstance. But when you consider that the Jewish Chronicle's current editorial team was put in place by a man who's still on the board of the BBC, charged, among other things, with addressing impartiality on Middle Eastern coverage, you could be forgiven for thinking you'd woken up in a parallel universe. I think you were about to say the leader of the opposition, Noga, before we lost you.
Yes, that the leader of the opposition also said yesterday and today that Netanyahu is betraying the interests of the state. There are really, really serious accusations relating to the first investigation that you mentioned. Yes. That Netanyahu's his office is tampering with documents in an effort to instill disinformation in the public space, actually led to the deaths of Israeli soldiers in Gaza and of hostages. So these accusations couldn't be worse for Netanyahu, and I think they lie behind his very dramatic action in the last 24 hours.
Don't look over there, look over here. And finally, Noga, the election of Donald Trump in America, what, if anything, does that change about the scenarios that you're describing?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because Netanyahu and his family and his ministers have not hidden their delight at the election of Donald Trump. And yet, Donald Trump and Netanyahu appear to be on a collision course. Netanyahu refuses to define an end to this war at any point. And Donald Trump has said he wants this over as soon as possible, and he has said so repeatedly. His vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, is the only Republican in Congress who voted against military aid to Israel. So I think we're in for some interesting times.
And happily, we can rely upon you to relay them to us, for which I thank you. Noga Tarnopolsky, freelance journalist there live from Jerusalem, where, as you've heard, if the attention of the world wasn't focused on events in America, it would be probably paying a little bit more attention to events in Israel, where, and listen, this is important because we've had a lot of conversations about this, but what these stories demonstrate is that the lazy response, the claim that in order to make the carnage stop, it was simply a case of releasing the hostages, has not been true for a very long time and is now demonstrably and irrefutably untrue. But I appreciate that next time we turn our attention to matters Middle Eastern, my inbox will fill up with that claim being made in capital letters once again. We're looking for the themes that unite all the madnesses in the world. It can't just be my internet correspondence. It's 12:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. I think Callum speaks for the country when he writes, wait, what? Sheila's back? Does she not sleep? What time did she clock off this morning? 5 a.m. 5 a.m. And what time is it now? 1 p.m. So that is 6, 8. Well, she could have got 6 or 7 hours of kipping, couldn't she, between now and... Anyway, Sheila will be diving straight back into the American election. If you're just joining us, how far around the world could I get with a joke at this point? And if you are literally just joining us, you'll never believe who won the American election. No, you're right. Stop messing around. It was Donald Trump. I want to turn your attention next to something completely different, something which, I don't know whether this is embarrassing or not, which caught my eye when it was sent to me because of the involvement of one of my favourite actors of all time. I speak of Alan Rickman. I did not know that Alan Rickman was a founding patron of a charity called Saving Faces, going so far as to launch a national research centre. Saving Faces is a charity which essentially enables better outcomes for people with facial cancers, with disfigurements and with facial injuries. And Tom Hosking is a patient advocate for that charity, for which I'm about to start trying to raise a few quid in order to help fund a professorship, something for which Alan Rickman actually bequeathed money to start the ball rolling. But before we get to that, Tom, can I ask about your injury? Can I ask how you got injured?
Yeah, certainly. Approximately 25 years ago, it only seems like yesterday, but about 25 years ago, I was at an industry event, a work event. It was out in the East End of London, so quite far from any sort of major transport hubs. A group of us were leaving the event. It was difficult to get journeys home. This was before smartphones and certainly before taxi apps. So we went down the main road, went to a petrol station, stocked up on supplies and thought, we'll call a cab from here.
Yeah.
At the entrance to the petrol station, to the shop, there was a dog that was tied up. I was with about 7 or 8 other people. Everybody else walked past the dog and acknowledged its presence. I did, went to stroke it, and the dog jumped up and bit my nose off.
I mean, you've told this story a few times, so you're used to my reaction to this. But I mean, literally took off a significant chunk of your nose.
Yes. Much to my surprise. I wasn't aware of it at the time.
When did you become aware? I mean, what happened next?
I became aware of it in the hospital when, at a time which I was getting worried about being able to go to work the next day, I said to the staff, please, can you just get a nurse to come and put some stitches in? Yeah. And my friends looked at me and said, you're going to need something a bit more than stitches. And I said, well, come on, it's just a dog bite.
Because they could see you.
Yes. And one of my friends said to me, what do you think is in here? And he pointed to a bag on his lap, which had 2 bags of frozen peas. And he said, any of your nose is in there, I'm afraid. And that's when it hit.
Well, it would.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
25 years ago?
Yeah. So I was mid-20s and second job in the career that I had.
What was the surgery like? I mean, I appreciate you'd have been under for it, but still, I mean, so you must know what was done and the importance of what we're about to move on to, which is more research and more work in this field.
Yeah, well, there were a number of different options that the surgical team had, and this is why the research is important, is to understand what is going to give the best outcomes for any given patient with any given facial condition. But the procedure that was done with myself was initially to take a graft from my forehead.
Right.
We've all got the vein that pops out when we're stressed or angry in our forehead. And what they did for me was they took a flap of skin, essentially, that took that vein with it, turned it through 180 degrees and stitched it onto the end of my nose. So the blood supply to the skin that eventually made up my nose was never cut. There was a continual supply of blood.
Absolutely extraordinary.
Yes. And that was then kept in place for 4 weeks while the surrounding piece of the nose that was the original nose formed its own supply. And when they were comfortable that supply had taken, they then took the flap off, and a number of operations afterwards to thin the nose, because obviously the skin in your forehead is thicker than the skin on the end of your nose, so it had to be shaped, retooled, if you like, as I had about 5 operations in total.
And it was the bit that was with the frozen peas that was reattached?
No.
That was completely gone now.
So they tried to reattach that. It didn't take. The bit on the end of my nose was originally my forehead.
So all of that flap is now. I mean, it's an incredible job, isn't it?
I think so.
However, it's traumatic on all sorts of levels. The charity works right across it. I mean, it's right across the scenarios, doesn't it? Because presumably an awful lot of people need a lot of counselling and mental health support as well as help with the physical side of it.
I mean, this is anybody that's had anybody that's even born with a condition or life treats them in such a way that an accident or a cancer or a disfigurement comes their way. Yes, it's the face is the most social part of our existence.
Yes.
It's what we make expressions with. It's what we fall in love with. It's what we're drawn to. It's what we're sometimes annoyed by.
You're speaking to a radio presenter, mate. Let's not get carried away with the importance. But no, you're obviously right, and you're obviously brilliant at talking about it. I presume that wasn't immediately true.
No, it was a challenge. Like I say, I was in my mid-20s at the time. I was single. I was, out and about often before the accident, I did worry. I had genuine concerns that I wouldn't be allowed into a nightclub or a bar again because I'd look like a wrong one with a scarred face.
Yes.
That didn't happen.
Good.
I was worried I'd never be able to get another job. That didn't happen, and I've been married for 21 years and got 2 kids.
Well, then I'll ask you another question, which may seem a little glib, but I promise you it isn't. What do you like with dogs these days?
Well, I've got to rush back after this because my puppy is...
Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm totally serious.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear it. I
Yeah.
know a lot of people listening will be wondering about that.
I wasn't very good for a while, but now I absolutely adore them.
Oh, that's nice to know as well. What can we do? Well, tell me about the professorship that Saving Faces is seeking to sponsor and why it would be so important.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, Alan Rickman bequeathed some money to Saving Faces to set up the professorship.
What was his interest?
He was his interest was he had a couple of very good friends who had facial disfigurements. One had a facial condition which had been brought about by life's rich pattern, and he saw the impact directly that this had on those individuals. One of them could never work again. One of them had a scenario which actually their face got significantly disfigured.
Gosh.
Removal of an eye, for example.
Yeah.
So he saw firsthand just what sort of impact facial cancers, disfigurements, injuries can have, and he wanted to do something about it.
Because it wasn't a space in which much attention was being achieved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the amount of money which is behind, or is the amount of funding rather, which is devoted to research into facial cancers and disfigurements and injuries is really quite small when compared to other types of cancer. So there really is a need for the research which is being done to be correlated so that surgeons across the world can benefit from learning from each other and learning what best outcomes can be achieved.
And do you have much contact with other beneficiaries of the charity? Do you sort of have support groups or do you help other people dealing with a trauma similar to yours?
Yeah, so as a patient advocate, I'm available to other people who are maybe going through surgery, thinking about it. So through Saving Faces, if there is somebody that is concerned about what a surgical procedure might be, what it might entail, then they can contact me through the charity, and I'm there to help and advise and to tell them what it was all about, what it was like.
What an amazing cause. And one of those charities that is not, as we say, front and centre in our thoughts a lot. But my God, when you need its help, you really, really need its help, don't you?
Absolutely.
And that's why I would urge you listening to this to donate. There are various ways in which you can do so. But let me send you first to the website, alanrickmanprof.org/donate/ or just go to savingfaces.co.uk. That might be easier to remember, actually. I'll tweet it from my account as well so that you can do so. There's a YouTube channel where you can see patients and surgeons making the case for this new professorship on Saving Faces YouTube channel. And if, like me, you're a massive fan, or you were a massive fan of Alan Rickman, this would be quite a nice little memorial to him as well, I think, Tom.
Absolutely. Yeah,
thank you, mate. It's an extraordinary story that you tell, and an extraordinary charity that I'm happy to help support. We should give a quick shout to my friend Professor Ian Hutchison as well, who is the sort of organiser and convener of this extremely good cause. That is it from me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Just going to chat. Are you all right?
I'm fine, thank you.
Are you awake?
Yes,
Wide
I am.
awake. Can I get you anything?
Well, it's all right. I have a little helper with me already who walked me down the stairs to make sure I got to the right studio. We should explain to our guest why you're talking to me like I'm a lunatic.
Sorry, Tom. Sheila was on air doing live election coverage until 5 o'clock this morning. I don't normally talk to her like this.
You're right, dear.
Yes, I am. Yeah,
Me too. We're all
sugar.
okay.
You need matchsticks for the eyes.
Yes, I do, yeah. And for other parts of my anatomy as well.
Tom Sawbrook with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty now completing the final leg of an immense shift.
I actually feel worse now than I did at the very end of the shift.
You'll feel all right in half an hour, won't you, when the adrenaline kicks in?
Running, and then I'll go home and sleep for 11 hours.
Indeedy.
Yeah. Don't know why I landed on 11. It's one of those mornings. Thank you very much to both of you. And I will retweet everything that James has just said from me. Thank you.
James O'Brien on LBC.